A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support. The question fluttered through my mind like a moth drawn to the dim light of my living room. It was simple, but the implications loomed heavy on my heart. Am I the asshole for charging my adult children rent? I never imagined this is where I would find myself at 55, standing at the crossroads of nurturing love and harsh reality. My children, Claire and Josh, had both moved back in after college, faced with a tight job market and student loans that loomed like clouds ready to burst. It felt like just yesterday I was sending them off into the world, filled with ambition and dreams, and now the stack of bills, once a distant whisper, was suddenly a roiling shout that demanded to be heard. I loved my children fiercely, but the reality of our situation was different now. My modest home, decorated with family photos that were practically engraved in my heart, was quickly becoming a shared refuge rather than a home. Things shifted, however, when the conversation turned to finances one evening while we surveyed my faded kitchen, once filled with laughter and now littered with remnants of takeout dinners. I broached the subject lightly, almost gingerly, trying to extricate myself from the churning feeling of guilt that wound tightly in my gut. You know, it's not that we can't help each other, I started, but maybe we should think about small contributions for living here. Claire, always the more outspoken of the two, rolled her eyes, casting a glance at Josh, who sat with his head buried in his phone, blissfully unaware. Seriously, Mom? Rent? We're trying to find our footing. She replied, exasperation cutting through her voice like a knife. I felt my heart sink as Josh chimed in, softening the blow with, we're still your kids, you know. Initially, I shrugged off their anger, convincing myself it stemmed from the stress of their own financial burdens, yet the guilt lingered like a shadow. The thought that I might be seen as cold or unloving gnawed at me. My thoughts spiraled, had I failed them by expecting them to contribute to the household? But then, another voice in my head reminded me of the sacrifices I had made. I had worked extra shifts to give them what they needed, and it dawned on me that this was about preparing them for the realities of adulthood, not about making me less of a mother. Still, I wrestled nightly with the decision, my journal filled with poignant reflections on whether love and responsibility could coexist without one overshadowing the other. It was during a heated argument a few days later that it all boiled over, my attempts at calm being met with more resentment. You say you're teaching us, but this feels more like punishment, Claire shouted, tears in her eyes. I held my breath, the weight of her distress settling heavily on my shoulders. In that moment, I realized it wasn't just about money, it was about trust and recognition. I'm not punishing you. I want you both to thrive. I want you to prepare for the world outside these walls, I replied, my voice trembling with emotion. The room became engulfed in silence, the air thick with unspoken words. It was clear I needed to reconsider the way forward. After much soul-searching, I decided to propose a compromise that would allow us to keep our familial bond intact. The very next day, I gathered my children and talked through my thoughts, removing the label of rent and instead framing it as a living contribution, focusing on what they could help with, whether it was chores or a small monthly amount that would go toward shared costs. To my surprise, they listened, the tension in the room gradually ebbing as we discussed our expectations with open hearts. So it's not about just money, right? It's teamwork? Josh asked, his eyes lighting up with understanding. I nodded fervently, relief washing over me like a tidal wave. We moved forward with boundaries but also with a renewed sense of cooperation, and I marveled at the transformation that occurred, realizing we were not simply roommates navigating rent but rather a family redefining our dynamics together. As the weeks turned into months, I discovered that this change not only eased my financial burden but also rekindled a sense of shared purpose among us. Conversations returned to the table, laughter emanated from our shared moments, and in those evenings spent together, it felt as if we were finding our way back, stitching back together what was nearly frayed. The idea of charging them rent became not a source of resentment but a catalyst for deeper connection. In hindsight, I didn't just charge them, I opened the door to joint stewardship of our lives, an adjustment that allowed us to step forward together rather than apart. As for updates, it's been almost a year since the paradigm shift, and I'm heartened to say Claire now has an internship that could lead to a full-time job, while Josh is earning his keep through freelance gigs. They still contribute to household expenses, each month passing me their share with pride, as if each note exchanged is more than just money, but a message that reads, "We've got this, together." And as I sit in the same faded kitchen, watching them grow into the people I always hoped they would be, I realize this journey has taught me as much as it has taught them. Am I the asshole? Perhaps once, But I've come to understand that sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that lead to the strongest connections. As I sit in that faded kitchen, sunlight streaming through the sheer curtains, casting soft shadows on the table where we gather for our makeshift family meetings, I reflect on how our home has transformed over the past few months. When Josh and Emily moved in, there was a palpable tension in the air, a mix of expectation and uncertainty. I had been battling my own insecurities and regrets about charging them rent, fearing it would disrupt our bond. Yet, every time I see them, filled with determination. As they balance schoolwork with part-time jobs, I feel an overwhelming sense of pride. Each evening, as we share our meals, the laughter echoes in the corners of the room, wrapping around us like a warm blanket, dispelling any lingering doubt I had initially held about my decision. It had been Josh who first approached me with concern about finances after losing his last full-time job. He spoke earnestly about wanting to contribute more rather than feel like a burden. "I don't want you to struggle because of me," he had said, that familiar spark of responsibility igniting in his eyes. How could I argue with that? Emily followed suit, her spirit equally fired up, insisting that she too wanted to pitch in, to contribute to the household in a way that felt meaningful. It was then that I realized this was about more than just money, it was about empowerment. With the rent agreement in place, I made it abundantly clear that their contributions would be saved toward a future goal, perhaps toward their educational aspirations or an eventual escape of their own, helping to ensure they wouldn't find themselves completely reliant on me once they stepped into the wider world. Each time I handed them a receipt showing their contributions, I would joke, "Look at you, you're practically business owners now." Following those jokes were serious discussions about budgeting and saving. They would listen intently, their eyes bright, eager to absorb the advice, while I shared tales from my own youth, trying to weave in lessons learned as I stumbled through life. Those evenings began to intertwine with deeper conversations about dreams, fears, and the kind of people they envisioned themselves becoming. With every discussion, I could feel our relationship evolving, both as a parent and as individuals seeking to understand one another. One rainy afternoon, however, things took a challenging turn. Emily returned home distraught, her usual spark dulled. "Mom, I don't know if I can continue doing this. It feels like everything is piling on top of me," she admitted, falling onto the couch, her voice strained and defeated. I joined her on the couch, pulling the fuzzy blanket over us as we settled into the silence that accompanied her heavy words. The weight of missed assignments and looming deadlines pressed on her like an ocean wave, and I could see the hope in her eyes flicker momentarily. "What if we adjust a bit? Rent doesn't always have to be paid in full," I offered gently. "Your well-being comes first. It's okay to ask for help." My words seemed to hang in the air, and for a moment, silence enveloped us before she finally nodded, a small smile breaking through the storm clouds. As the weeks rolled by, we found new rhythms, discussing every tweak and adjustment we made to our agreements candidly. Josh, too, began to share his own struggles more openly, confessing moments of loneliness and his fear of never reaching the ambitions he carried. It was during one of these powerful exchanges that I understood the true essence of decisions made from love. Not only did they learn responsibility, but they also discovered vulnerability and space for genuine dialogue, something I had always longed for us to possess. We emerged stronger as a family, moved forward by empathy and mutual respect, acknowledging our individual journeys without losing sight of our shared path. In this warm cocoon of familiarity and love, I've realized that our home isn't just a physical space, it's a sanctuary carved from our shared experiences, successes, and collective heartaches. The question of whether I was the asshole lingers somewhere in the back of my mind, but it has transformed from a painful inquiry into an echo of a lesson learned. By fostering their independence within the walls of our home, I not only nurtured their growth but also kept the ties of our relationship tightly woven, reminding us all that love doesn't fade in the face of responsibility. Instead, it evolves, deepening in ways I could never have imagined. As I sit here, I can see that it isn't about the money or even the chores, it's about understanding, growth, and creating an environment where we can all be better versions of ourselves together. And while the future is uncertain, a chorus of questions still unanswered, I feel a profound sense of gratitude for this shared journey, knowing that being a parent is less about getting it right all the time and more about navigating every twist and turn with an open heart. Sometimes, I find solace in the thought of letting each of them fly with their own set of wings, ready to embrace whatever the world has in store, while I would remain here, cheering them on from the sidelines, proud of the choices we made together in this home of ours. However, as the weeks passed, I began to experience an unfamiliar unease, a gentle pressure building beneath the surface of our harmonious existence. It started with those quiet moments, sitting alone in my favorite worn-out chair while Josh and Lena collaborated at the kitchen table, their laughter and chatter creating a cozy atmosphere that made my heart swell with pride. Yet, tucked away in the corner of my mind was a prickling doubt, whispering that perhaps I had placed an unnecessary burden on their shoulders. The thoughts started to gnaw at me during sleepless nights, where thoughts raced through my mind like leaves caught in a gust of wind, questioning my decisions and choices. They did, after all, come to me during the pandemic when everything had been uncertain, their lives upended in ways I couldn't fully grasp. I remember my own parents, who had faced such trials with grit and resilience, but never once did they charge me rent. As days turned into weeks, the tight-knit bond we shared sometimes felt like it stood on shaky ground. I tried to brush it off, focusing on the joy of our routines, breakfast-making competitions, game nights peppered with sarcasm and laughter. And those afternoons when I would find them lost in their respective worlds, creativity bursting from them like blooming wildflowers. But the shadows of my thoughts lingered, lingering as a subtle reminder that their growing independence came with its own set of fears. One night, after an especially hectic day, I was cleaning up the remnants of dinner, overwhelmed by a sudden wave of clarity. I turned to them and, in a voice that quivered with a mix of uncertainty and resolve, asked if they felt the same way I did. To my surprise, their expressions turned serious, and I felt as if I had ventured into unknown territory. Josh, with his thoughtful gaze, spoke first. "Mom, we appreciate everything you've done for us. We're here because you let us be ourselves, and if charging rent is part of that, then we accept it as a part of our growth." Lena, always the more intuitive one, added, "It's funny you mention this because I was worried it was our responsibility to take care of you, not the other way around." Their words, laden with sincerity, left me both relieved and bewildered. Here I was, thinking I was the one responsible for their future, yet together, we had created something profound, a partnership built on mutual respect and support. The subsequent weeks held a newfound sense of openness, the pressure lifted, replaced by unexpected lightness. We spoke often, delving into deeper conversations about financial stability, career aspirations, and dreams yet to be realized. Each discussion became a building block, forming a bridge between my worries and their understanding of adulthood, and suddenly, Josh and Lena were no longer just my children, but partners in a shared journey of life. As we moved further into this phase of our lives, I began to find joy in the small victories, the little projects that each of them undertook that ventured into adulthood's daunting reality, with me as a spectator cheering them on in the background. One evening, each of them sat next to me, Josh back from a successful project pitch, Lena having submitted her first freelance article, the air thick with accomplishment. I placed my hand on theirs, a silent acknowledgement of our collective achievements, a bond that transcended the need for rent or adulting responsibilities. They were soaring, and I realized I was simply here to help them acclimate to the winds beneath their wings. And so our story evolved, settling into a rhythm that felt genuine and nurturing. It was about more than money or bills, it was about lessons learned under our roof, and I cherished the thought that perhaps I hadn't been the asshole after all. It was merely the ebb and flow of family dynamics shifting. With nights spent under the gentle glow of lamplight discussing prospects and dreams, I understood that being together, sharing our fears and aspirations, had emboldened us, allowing for a new understanding about what it means to navigate adulthood together. As we moved further into this unknown future, I embraced it. The unknown no longer felt like a weight but a canvas awaiting our colors. Perhaps being a parent is knowing when to let the reins go, and I felt ready for whatever paths lay ahead. The uncertainty didn't haunt me anymore, it ignited a sense of adventure. So, maybe in this journey, I was never an asshole, but rather just a guide, and we were collectively painting a beautiful masterpiece of our shared lives. In a world that sometimes feels strained by the clamor of differing tongues, I found myself at the center of a linguistic tug-of-war with my husband, Tom. I've always had a deep passion for the German language. It had been a part of my life since I was a child, nurtured by bedtime stories my grandmother would tell me in her lilting accent. When Tom and I met in college, I was amazed at how he soaked in those stories too, admiring my enthusiasm for a culture that seemed so distant to him, an American born and bred. Over the years, that admiration blossomed into love, but in the intimacy of our shared life, our once attractive differences began to fray at the edges. Tom studied German diligently for a while but soon found the nuances overwhelming, preferring to converse in the simple, comforting rhythms of English. But I loved to practice my German, and as the months slipped into years, it became my default language, a habitual comfort zone that I didn't realize was isolating him. One quiet evening after dinner, The familiar dance of our conversation took an unexpected turn when he asked me, gently but firmly, if I could refrain from speaking German at home as it sometimes made him feel excluded. The request struck me deeply. It felt like a rejection of a part of who I was, yet his eyes had that vulnerable glint that said he was struggling with his own feelings too. I was torn. Should I honor his request, sacrificing my linguistic flair for the sake of his comfort, or could I, in good conscience, continue speaking German, even if it meant detracting from our shared space? My thoughts churned that night, the shadows of self-doubt creeping in, mimicking our sad quiet as we ended the day. Was I the asshole for wanting to indulge in something that was such a part of me, or was I merely turning my back on a plea from the heart? Days turned into a strange dance of half-phrases in English and attempts at German that felt like a betrayal to the warmth and fluidity I thrived in. I saw flashes of disappointment in Tom's eyes each time I caught myself slipping back into my cherished words. It was an unnerving cycle. Each apology towards him felt like another nail in my own heart. The bright candlelight of our evenings dimmed, booths in our favorite restaurants filled with the silence of unspoken grievances. It wasn't until a particularly stormy night that we truly cracked open the chasm between us. Sitting in our living room, rain like a relentless drum on the roof, I finally laid bare my emotions. I told him how important it was for me to retain that part of my personality, that it felt as intrinsic to my being as breathing. And there in that cozy, rain-soaked space, our hearts opened wide, he admitted that while he loved me and admired my passion, he sometimes felt like he was on the outside looking in. It was a powerful exchange, raw and painful, but it was illuminated by an understanding that only deepened our bond. We spoke until the rain slowed, weaving through layers of our emotions, fears, and desires. By the end, we found a middle ground. We agreed that I could speak German during specific times, perhaps in moments of playfulness or passion, while committing to using English for our everyday conversations. It was a compromise born out of respect and love, a promise to nurture both my passion and his feelings. Months later, wrapped in the warmth of our love and mutual respect, I found joy in the sounds of both languages echoing through our home. I realized that love, like language, is best expressed in fluidity and understanding. We created our own little world, embracing a balance that felt harmonious, a beautiful cacophony of English conversations sprinkled with delightful German whispers. Sometimes, in those quiet moments, I catch Tom grinning when I slip into German to narrate a mundane event. It's a reassuring reminder that rather than diminishing our connection, my passion is woven seamlessly into our shared rhythm. It brings us closer, sparking late-night discussions about culture and identity, far more intimate than a mere exchange of words. As for my own internal conflict, it reshaped me into a partner who learned the beauty of compromise, whose heart echoes with gratitude for the understanding we carved from our differences. And on particularly slow afternoons, we sometimes find ourselves curled up with a book of German fairy tales, and for just a moment, the language that brought me to life becomes a bridge we walk hand in hand upon. However, our peaceful coexistence faced an unexpected challenge that I hadn't seen coming, and it started rather innocuously, with a flurry of messages from a close friend who was traveling to Germany. She was sending me pictures of charming villages, bustling markets, and the kind of enchanting landscapes that always called to my adventurous spirit. Each image ignited a longing within me, stirring the remnants of my passion for the language and culture as if I were being beckoned back to my roots. I found myself daydreaming about walking among the timber-framed houses of Rothenburg ob der Tauber, sipping coffee in a quaint cafe while laboriously picking apart the intricacies of my beloved language. With each ecstatic message I shared with my husband, Oliver, I ventured deeper into my reminiscing. But then a thought began to fester like a shadow in the back of my mind. I was slipping away from our shared language, and would that not create a rift again? In a moment that felt like a culmination of tension, I set my phone down and took a deep breath, deciding to tell him. One evening, while we prepared dinner, I casually mentioned how much I missed speaking German fluently. As I said those words, I felt the sparks that often flew between us dim just slightly. He cleared his throat, his back turned to me as the garlic sizzled in the pan. "You know it's hard for me when you speak that way," he replied softly, the uncharacteristic strain in his voice tinging my excitement with remorse. I felt the warmth of the kitchen wrap around us, but a chill crept into my heart. I could see where this was headed. I was about to dance on the edges of our previous discussions, tiptoeing around old insecurities. My mind raced as I weighed the prospect of expressing my desire against the well-worn caution of his sensitivity toward my enthusiasm. In his eyes, my love for the language sometimes felt like a conflation of identities, a risk that threatened to dilute the bond we had carefully rebuilt. It was never that he didn't appreciate the beauty of it, he just felt far removed from it, as if it were a melodious tune he couldn't fully hear. I offered a kind smile and said, "How about we practice together? Just a little? It might help us connect even more." For a moment, his shoulders dropped as if a weight had been lifted, and then that familiar tension began to creep back. "I don't want to feel left out," he said, a hint of defeat in his voice. It cut deep. I had unknowingly placed him into a familiar corner, a place that meant both of us retreading an old, risky narrative. Yet, this time, I saw an opportunity. Instead of focusing on our differences, I could bring him into my passion rather than pushing him away from it. I let silence envelop us, letting his thoughts swirl in the still air of the kitchen, and when it felt right, I proposed a solution. What if I spoke as fluently as I wanted, but also shared the meaning? I could help bridge the language too, like I did before. We could find a balance. Slowly, I watched as his frown morphed into thoughtfulness. "You truly want to bring me with you, don't you?" he asked with a cautious smile. "I do," I affirmed, the sincerity ringing in my heart, resonating through the air like the faint echo of a bell. Over the next few months, we began a new chapter together, one marked by our evenings spent in our cozy living room, dictionaries and notes sprawled around us, laughter punctuating the soft hum of our conversations. I shared with Oliver the stories behind the words, the richness of expressions and idioms that had once captivated me. I watched as his eyes lit up when unraveling the humor of a joke in German or realizing the affection imbued in a simple phrase. We even began to weave our private language, a blend of English and German that was uniquely ours. But with each passing week, our discussions deepened. The language, once a bridge and then a wall, transformed into a tapestry that enveloped us in colors of understanding. We talked about identity, culture, and our values, each thread strengthening the bond we had constructed over our differences. We shared our fears, Oliver expressing the insecurities of feeling linguistically inadequate, while I confessed my worries of losing touch with my heritage. And in those moments, the air filled with a shared understanding that surpassed words. Months later, as I nestled into the warmth of our oversized couch one rainy evening, surrounded by books and a steaming cup of herbal tea, it struck me how beautifully we had rebuilt our connection. The gray clouds draped outside, yet inside, it felt eternally sunlit with warmth and understanding. With my skin tingling from the memories of our journey, I decided to share our progress in a post on a Reddit community that focused on relationships. I titled my thread "A Myth Asshole Wibta If I Only Spoke German to My Husband Despite Him Requesting I Don't?" But as I typed, it felt less like a plea for validation and more a celebration of a love that had transcended language barriers. Lastly, I fondly recounted our journey, the blending of cultures, how we found our rhythm again, and I concluded with a question to the community: have you found harmony in your differences? As I posted it, a sense of relief washed over me. I had made it through a tumultuous chapter, and now we stood, hand in hand, ready to explore the landscapes of our vibrant, shared life together. Soon after, I received a wave of supportive and insightful replies, many expressing similar experiences, which encouraged me further. Later that night, as I drifted off to sleep, I looked over at Oliver, his peaceful face illuminated by the moonlight streaming through our window. I realized anew that love, much like language, is a journey, not a destination. Each step we took together unveiled not just the beauty in our differences, but also the harmony that lay within, patiently waiting to be discovered. As the soft glow of dawn began to fill our bedroom, I stirred awake to find Oliver already up, immersed in his morning ritual of brewing coffee. The rich aroma seeped through the air, weaving itself into the fabric of my thoughts. I watched him from the comfort of our rumpled bed, the way the sun kissed his tousled hair, and felt a swell of affection. This was our life, a gentle dance of routine and spontaneity. But underneath the surface, excitement tinged with a sense of trepidation lingered. Today marked the beginning of my exploration into joining a local German conversation group. After my post online, a number of people had urged me to enhance my language skills further, not just for my own fulfillment but for the bridge it could build between Oliver and me. I knew he wanted me to improve my English as well, and while he supported my passion, there was still a mutual understanding hovering between us that needed to be navigated carefully. The group met in a cozy cafe downtown, where laughter mingled with the sounds of clinking cups and the soft whir of the espresso machine. As I stepped inside, the chatter seemed to swallow me whole. I spotted a table filled with fellow language adventurers, each with a story and a shared commitment to embracing a new tongue. With a nervous smile, I slid into an empty chair, the warmth of the gathering slowly enveloping me. Conversations took flight as we practiced phrases, stuttered over difficult pronunciations, and stumbled through the occasional awkward silence, laughter breaking the tension. I felt a spark of something familiar igniting within me, an eagerness to embrace the nuances. It was exhilarating, yet I couldn't shake the thought of Oliver, wondering if he would feel left out or if he was simply letting me fly on this new adventure. That evening, as we settled back into our routine, I couldn't help but share my excitement with Oliver. His face lit up with a genuine smile, yet beneath the enthusiasm, I sensed a flicker of apprehension. "It sounds amazing, actually," he said, pausing as if weighing his words carefully. "But promise me you'll still speak with me in English when we're home. I want you to feel free to express yourself with me fully." His earnest gaze met mine, sincerity draping each syllable in warmth. As I nodded, I could feel the weight of our unspoken understanding, a desire to balance my passion with the importance of our connection. However, the next few days were an exercise in self-discipline and compromise. I found myself wanting to slip into German more often, the phrases just at the tip of my tongue, eager to dance into the spaces we shared. But in doing so, I sometimes caught a glimpse of Oliver's discomfort, the furrowed brow when he couldn't follow my excitement, the brief silence when I spoke a sentence too rapid in my newfound confidence. This tug-of-war between my zeal and his request started to weigh on my heart. Were the walls I erected to protect my love inadvertently turning impenetrable? After a particularly frustrating attempt at explaining a simple story in German to him, resulting in more confusion than connection, I felt a rush of guilt clawing at my insides. I walked to the window, looking out at the twilight blending into night, the world outside a tapestry of muted colors. It struck me then how language, glorious as it could be, was a tool meant for connection, not division. Perhaps I had let my excitement overshadow the core of our relationship, and a wave of remorse flooded over me as I thought of our conversations where he patiently navigated between my two languages. That night, I made a decision. I turned to Oliver, who was curled up with a book of his own, and took a deep breath. "How about we create space for both?" I suggested softly, and he glanced up, surprise flickering across his features. "Let's set aside specific times for German. And when you're tired or lost, I'll be right here, ready to help you navigate back to English. Let's learn together." His eyes shone with a mix of understanding and relief as a smile broke across his face. In the following weeks, we embraced this newfound rhythm. Each night, we dipped into German for a little while, navigating through stories, fairy tales we both loved, or snippets from the news that intrigued us. When the words stumbled, we laughed until our stomachs hurt, and I cherished the look in his eyes as they sparkled with shared discovery and patience. Our evenings were filled with light-hearted attempts at pronunciation, playful teasing when one of us would mix up words, and the comforting realization that no matter the language, love threaded itself seamlessly between us. As I lay in bed amidst the whispers of night, I smiled, feeling a warmth blanket around my heart. I had aimed for fluency, but what I had found was something richer, an intimacy forged through compassion and understanding. Each mistake became a stepping stone, revealing the path that lay not just to understanding German, but deeper connections that breathed life into our relationship. The journey of language became a metaphor for our love story, filled with missteps yet painted with the beauty of growth, both together and individually. And as I reached for Oliver's hand, I realized that love, like language, was a living, breathing entity, forever expanding, ever changing, but always anchored in the safety of shared affection. The sun was dipping below the horizon as I sat on my porch, a cup of chamomile tea warming my hands and the gentle rustle of leaves filling the quiet air. It was one of those evenings when the world felt still, a perfect backdrop for the thoughts swirling in my mind about my sister, Kathy, and her unusual fixation on her new child. She had been so ecstatic when she announced her pregnancy, and even now, weeks after little Milo's birth, the whole family was under the spell of this newborn. Everyone, it seemed, except me. As I sipped my tea, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, not with Milo, but with the way Kathy was treating him. The moment I stepped into her house for the first time post-delivery, I was hit with a wave of bizarrely exaggerated decor dedicated to him. Photos plastered across the walls, his name in neon lights above a crib that seemed more like a museum piece than a place for sleeping. It felt less like celebrating a life and more like a personal art installation from Kathy that demanded to reclaim the attention she had always been dependent on. I could recall something each time I visited, the wild comments rolling off her tongue, like how she believed Milo was destined for greatness, as if he were already writing the next great American novel from his crib. Wincing at such pressure woven into a life that was only just beginning, I wondered if anyone else saw the disconnection behind her infatuation. It all came to a head during this one family gathering. The air was thick with a mix of laughter and baby cooing when it slipped out, an offhand remark from me in a moment of terrible impatience. I had meant it lightly, but the words spiraled beyond my control. "Kathy, I know you love him, but I don't think a plastic doll counts as a real baby." Her face had drained of color, and the entire room went silent, eyes darting back and forth between us. I could hardly breathe, the shocking realization of what I had said crashing over me like a wave, and suddenly I was the villain in everyone's tale. Kathy's hands trembled as she held Milo close to her, a line of protectiveness flaring to life. I watched her posture close in, her expression blackening like a storm cloud. "What do you mean, a doll? He's my baby," she retorted, her voice sharp yet fragile, as if the words were made of glass. I stammered a half-hearted apology, fumbling with my thoughts in the face of her hurt. Part of me felt guilty for not taking her obsession seriously, but another part boiled with frustration. I loved her, and I wanted her to step back from this illusion, this almost delusional state she had created around motherhood, a base trust built on the genuine nurturing that true parenting demanded. Over the next couple of weeks, my life became a tangle of texts from family members asking if I was okay, trying to convince me to apologize profusely, or shaming me for my insensitive comment. Meanwhile, Kathy retreated into herself, avoiding me during family dinners, which just made the entire situation more awkward. I couldn't help but feel a swell of loneliness, like a haze settling over me. I kept fixing our broken relationship in my mind, pondering how I could ease her back to reality without jeopardizing our bond. Finally, in a moment of clarity amidst the fog of my anxieties, I sat down with a pen and paper. I wrote Kathy a letter, pouring out my heart in the way I couldn't face her directly. I told her I saw the mother in her, the love she poured into her baby, but that I worried she was losing the chance to be present in Milo's life by creating a world that felt unreal. A few days later, she responded. The letter was heartfelt, thick with emotion, but she'd woven in threads of defensiveness, describing how she felt so much pressure as a new mother to get everything right. I understood then that she wasn't just immersed in an illusion for my sake but for herself, a desperate attempt to claim identity in a role that felt immense and overwhelming. We met afterward at the park, the crisp air bringing fresh hope as I walked alongside her, both of us with our insecurities and tenderness laid bare. I promised to support her, to be there through the chaos and sleepless nights, and as we laughed at the ridiculousness of plastic dolls in the middle of our shared parental journey, I felt the aching distance begin to disappear, with the first baby steps toward reconciliation. "So, was I the asshole?" I asked her gently, needing to know if I had crossed a line too far. She shook her head, her lips curling upwards into a soft smile. "No, just a blunt sister who cares too much." In that moment, the weight I had carried began to lift, crafting an opening through which trust and love could flow again. We didn't have all the answers, but we had each other, real and raw, ready to navigate this strange world of parenting together, one imperfect step at a time. A few months later, reflecting on that night, I found that Kathy had truly embraced the chaotic journey of motherhood. She had filled her home with memories instead of just decorations, and I often caught glimpses of her laughing at some mess Milo had made, remembering how quickly life can be both beautiful and exhausting. It was a reminder of the deeper roots of connection, real or metaphorical, the bond that continued to thrive despite the heated moments, rendering the word asshole a distant afterthought on our shared journey of love. As I settled into bed that evening, I took a deep breath, allowing the warmth of family and the nature of recovery to weave into my dreams, knowing that the true beauty of life lies in our imperfections. The next few days passed in a gentle blur, each moment blending into another like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. My thoughts danced between the sweet laughter of my niece and the shadows of that sharp confrontation with my sister. Sipping coffee in my small kitchen, I let my mind wander as I watched the rain streak against the window, imagining the little milestones I expected Milo to reach. And then, as if the universe cottoned to my neglect and acknowledging the unresolved feelings swirling inside me, my phone buzzed, pulling me back to reality. It was a message from Claire, one of those whimsical updates she loved to send, featuring a video of Milo clutching at a stuffed giraffe while gurgling pleasantly. Despite the swirling conflict that had weighed on my heart, I couldn't help but smile at the sight of him, his innocent joy begging for love and attention. As the days rolled on, I found myself reflecting deeply about what had transpired between my sister and me. It wasn't just her intense love for Milo that prompted the conflict, it was my own feelings of disconnection and discomfort. I hadn't held a baby in years. I had no framework to understand my sister's adoration, which often felt overwhelming in its intensity. Is that why I reacted so harshly? I mused, tracing the lines of the wooden table with my fingers. It was a lesson in empathy, one that demanded from me an exploration beyond the tangible, into the depths of reason and emotion. Face to face with my own vulnerabilities, I understood that I had played the role of the contrarian, perhaps attempting to temper her unyielding praise with my rational skepticism, but in doing so, I had dismissed a fundamental part of her motherhood. Later that week, I decided it was time to extend the olive branch, realizing that this misunderstanding could easily fracture our close-knit bond if left unaddressed. I invited her for a coffee in a cozy cafe perched on the corner of our neighborhood, a spot that held joyful memories of laughter and sisterly connection. As I took a seat at the small round table, my heart fluttered with a mix of remorse and courage. Claire arrived shortly thereafter, her expression betraying a mix of apprehension and curiosity. "Hey," she greeted, her eyes darting before settling on mine. A moment hung heavily between us, as if time itself was hesitating to take the next step. "Hey," I replied, motioning for her to sit. "I wanted to talk, to clear the air." She nodded, her fingers wrapping nervously around her coffee cup. The barista delivered our drinks, breaking the tension momentarily with the scent of fresh espresso and the quiet hum of cups clinking. "I feel like I hurt you when I said that thing about Milo," I began, my voice softer than anticipated as I approached the crux of our dilemma. "I shouldn't have dismissed your love for him. It's real and powerful, and it's something to be celebrated, not questioned." Her brow furrowed in contemplation. "It's just, sometimes, I feel like people don't understand," she finally admitted, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "They think because I have a different experience of motherhood, or maybe because I'm a little overprotective, it makes me less valid. I don't want you to see him like that." The air around us lightened. And I felt the walls we had built slowly begin to crumble. My heart ached for the love we shared, but also for the walls we had built in moments of misunderstanding. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Claire. I've been struggling to connect with that part of your life. I just didn't expect the reaction I had," I confessed, a tremor within the lines of my voice. It was almost cathartic to admit that I had been caught off guard by the power of her maternal instinct, and in that breath of honesty, a subtle understanding bloomed between us. She nodded, her once tense posture softening with each word exchanged. As we continued to talk, honesty ricocheting between our hearts, I felt a sense of relief I hadn't anticipated. Sharing our fears, our insecurities as sisters navigated in different realms of life, allowed us to embrace the authenticity of our experience. The conversation drifted toward lighter topics, both of us eventually finding bits of laughter woven back into our dialogue. And right before we parted, Claire leaned over and took my hands in hers, her laughter rolling like waves echoing the warmth we had built back. "Let's schedule a weekend together at my place? I'd love for you to spend time with Milo. I think he'll really enjoy getting to know his amazing aunt." When I returned home, the weight of conflict lifted significantly. I realized I had so much to learn, yet it was wonderful to resonate with the ongoing journey toward understanding. Through my sister's eyes, through her simplest joys, I could find connections twinkling in the small moments, an invitation to a new life cradled not just in love but also in the vulnerability of letting go of what I thought and embracing the reality of what truly is. Some days are beautiful messes, and I knew I had a part to play in coloring those experiences with her, as sisters and as a family. Over the following weeks, I remained intertwined with Claire and Milo's lives more intimately, engaging in every one of their innocent moments with increasing excitement. Eventually, as I lay down each night, I allowed myself moments to reflect on how beautifully tangled our lives had become. Each layer, each moment of honesty, formed an intricate tapestry of connection woven from love, understanding, and acceptance. In those peaceful reflections, intertwined with laughter and the echo of a new understanding, I found the kind of solace I hadn't known I was searching for. The realization dawned upon me as I drifted to sleep that maybe life's imperfections and challenges could incite the most profound connections, and it was those very bonds I'd built with my sister that reminded me of the remarkable tapestry of life we all share, even, and perhaps especially, when we don't fully understand each other. The morning sun broke through the curtains with a gentle glow, nudging me awake to another day intertwined with the realities of sisterhood and the enigmatic world of parenthood. As I rose from my slumber, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the air, beckoning me towards the kitchen where Emma busied herself, cradling Milo with one arm while stirring a pot of oatmeal with the other. The sight was almost cinematic, a perfect blend of chaos and tenderness that defined her new life. I couldn't help but smile, but a familiar twinge of guilt laced my thoughts. The previous day's confrontation hung in the air like an uncomfortable breeze, and I knew we hadn't fully wrapped up our discussion about what it meant to be a mother in her eyes versus mine. Over breakfast, our conversation flowed effortlessly at first, light-hearted remarks exchanged amid spoonfuls of oatmeal and the sporadic gurgle of Milo. But as Emma shared her latest parenting triumphs and trials, I could feel the unsaid words lingering between us, creating an important, yet unspoken, tension. Just as the atmosphere turned fragile, I watched her face transform, suddenly reflecting the worry I had seen only moments before in her laughter. "Do you really believe Milo isn't a real baby?" she asked, her voice hanging between vulnerability and defiance. My heart sank. I had never intended to undermine her journey, but the truth I spoke felt so distant from the love she poured into him. "It's not that he isn't real," I stammered, trying to tread carefully. "It's more about how we perceive these relationships. Your love for him is immeasurable, but I worry about how these expectations affect you." Her brow furrowed, and I could see the storm of emotions brewing just behind her eyes. "You think I'm playing house?" she hissed, each word a sharp shard. I could feel the ground beneath me shifting, my own heart racing as fear knotted my stomach. It was difficult to see my sister hurt, and the distance between our perspectives only widened in that moment. "No, Emma, that's not what I meant at all." My voice softened, the urgency to mend the rift propelling me forward. "I want to celebrate your bond. I see how much you love him, but I also want to make sure you don't find yourself lost in this identity." She shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "How can I be lost when I spent years dreaming of moments like these? How can you think I wouldn't know what's real?" There it was, the core of her pain, the feeling of not being understood, not being seen in the half-light of doubt I had cast over her life. I felt a wave of emotion crash over me as I searched for the right words to bridge the chasm. "I'm sorry," I whispered, feeling the sincerity of my apology wash over my words. "I'm afraid of what happens when the novelty fades and how it might feel to confront the reality of parenting. I just want to make sure you're okay." Her silence spoke volumes, a mixture of resentment, understanding, and perhaps a trace of compassion for my misplaced fear. We remained suspended in that moment until slowly, like the dawn creeping through the night, she exhaled deeply. "I appreciate your concern, but I wish you could trust me more. I'm deep in this, and it's beautiful, even if it's messy." Those words etched themselves on my heart, each syllable a reminder of the need for trust amidst uncertainty. With that, the tension began melting away as if the morning sunlight was burning through our darkness. We spent the rest of the day navigating shared moments together, plays with Milo transforming into laughter-filled bursts of joy, the kind only siblings can ignite in each other. As the hours passed, with each silly face made and every coup exchanged, I let go of the need to be right and allowed space for Emma to lead. When evening fell, and the amber dusk settled lazily outside the windows, we curled onto the couch, each cradling Milo, their hearts synchronized in a new rhythm of understanding. I held my breath as she began to sing softly, tapping into that innate bond that tied us together, unearthing things that transcended mere words. I felt a sense of clarity wash over me, reassuring me that the journey we were on was uniquely ours, regardless of how we perceived it. I realized that love exists in its many forms, and in order to embrace that love, we didn't have to understand every facet of it, we simply had to accept it. That night, as I drifted into sleep once more, I felt a deep sense of peace, a profound connection to my sister fortified by our shared vulnerabilities. The beauty of our imperfect lives felt both heavy and light, reminding me that we carry each other as we navigate through the complexities of love and identity. My heart swelled at the thought of the many future moments we would continue to craft together against the backdrop of life's ever-changing tapestry. Although I hadn't found all the answers, I took comfort in knowing that I was never alone on this journey, and perhaps that was what mattered most. It was a chilly Sunday afternoon, the kind where the fading light seemed to seep through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the living room, and I found myself curled up in my favorite chair with a steaming mug of chamomile tea cradled between my hands. My name is Lucy, and at 32, I have perfected the art of being the family mediator. My brother, Ben, is 4 years younger than me and has always been the golden child, charming, athletic, and now engaged to Tara, a woman who seemed equally perfect on the surface. Lately, however, something about Tara felt off, and on that particular afternoon, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I needed to talk to my mom about it. We settled into our usual routine, chatting about the mundane details of the week, until I finally broached the subject, tentatively mentioning how I had overheard a conversation between Ben and Tara that felt suspicious. It was more about her complications during the pregnancy than anything else, and although I initially brushed it off, the unease had lingered long after. Mom listened intently, her brow furrowing as I recounted the conversation. I wasn't trying to gossip, It was more an attempt to express my concern, to make sense of the tension building in my family. As I spoke, I could see the worry etched on my mother's face, and I almost regretted opening up. What if it upset her or made her doubt her son's judgment? The last thing I wanted was to fracture our family dynamic. But the more I spoke, the more I felt that maybe I wasn't the only one who sensed something amiss. My mom finally took a deep breath, and with an incredulous look, she shared how she too had observed odd behaviors from Tara, especially how she seldom spoke of the baby without a hint of hesitation. My heart raced, teetering on the edge of suspicion. Was it possible that my gut instinct was right? The conversation spiraled, weaving through layers of what-ifs, and soon we were digging into the details of Tara's past, which we had only pieced together from Ben's largely glowing accounts. The discussion fueled a whirlwind of emotions within me. It felt strange to judge someone who was soon to be family, but there was an undeniable tension growing like a shadow over our household. Days passed, and despite my desire to distance myself from the tumultuous thoughts, I found myself contemplating my brother's happiness and sanity. The knowledge of my chat with my mom nagged at me. Was I being the supportive sibling or merely perpetuating family drama? The more I pondered, the heavier the air felt, until one evening, Ben called me unexpectedly. He sounded off, his voice trembled slightly, and his laughter felt forced. The perfect brother had cracked. My stomach twisted, and I listened as he talked about the challenges of impending fatherhood, how Tara's recent erratic behavior was something he was trying to understand. I wanted to scream, "You've got to be careful." But instead, I urged him to lean on me if he ever needed to vent. I realized then how much I cared for him and how reluctant I was to see him hurt, but did that make me an asshole for even discussing my worries with Mom in the first place? In a moment of vulnerability, I decided to confide in Ben about the conversation with Mom. I expected outrage, a defensive posture, but to my surprise, he was quiet, contemplative. He promised to talk things over with Tara. After hanging up, nausea washed over me. Was it right to have stirred this pot, or was I simply being protective? The weight of my choices felt suffocating, and while I hoped it would lead to clarity, I feared the storm it could unleash. Weeks later, something unforeseen happened. Ben called again, but this time his voice was laced with relief. Tara had agreed to family counseling, and during their discussions, it had come out that she had been under immense pressure, family struggles and the overwhelming fears of motherhood were buried deep, and she had masked them behind a facade of happiness. It wasn't deceit, it was pain, and a fear of inadequacy that I had never considered. My heart sank as I realized how misguided my suspicions had been. I had put Tara under the spotlight without truly knowing her story, and now I was left with mixed feelings about the gossip I shared with my mom. What I thought was an innocent conversation had triggered a catalyst for something much deeper. In the end, I breathed a sigh of relief, not just for Ben but for Tara too, who was at last seeking the help she desperately needed. I turned to my mom, who had been waiting anxiously to hear the news, and laughed softly at how quickly things had spiraled out of control. I realized I wasn't an asshole, I was simply human, trying to navigate the chaos of family life. Family dynamics certainly are complicated, filled with emotions that intertwine like vines. As I sipped my tea and reflected on the journey, I felt a sense of calm enveloping me, and I could finally embrace the imperfections that came with love. Maybe it was all just part of the messiness, and I wouldn't shy away from it again. Update: a few months later, Tara invited my mom and me for coffee, and for the first time, I saw a woman who had started to find her footing once again. We talked openly, and I realized the power of vulnerability and healing. This was no longer about suspicion or gossip, it was about connection and understanding. As I sat among family, a newfound sense of openness enveloped me, and I knew we were all moving forward together, one step at a time. The shadows had lifted, revealing a path to a stronger family bond, forged through honesty and love. As the warm sunlight flooded through the cafe window, illuminating the small round table where my mother, Tara, and I sat, I couldn't help but think about how far we had all come in just a few short months. The echoes of past gossip and the weight of previous misunderstandings felt like distant memories, replaced instead by the sound of laughter and heartfelt conversation. Tara, once a figure cloaked in suspicion and tension, now radiated a sense of acceptance that I hadn't anticipated. She spoke candidly about her struggles, her voice steady, yet softening with each word, a stark contrast to the defensiveness that had once marked our exchanges. The cafe buzzed with the hum of patrons and the clinking of cups, but in that small bubble of shared vulnerability, it felt as if time had consolidated just for us. I shared my feelings about the turmoil that had erupted within our family, How the whispering fears about her integrity had clouded our judgment, and how difficult it had been to navigate my loyalty to my mother while also grappling with my concerns about Tara's motives. Yet, as we spoke, her eyes shone with a depth of understanding that made me realize she had been fighting her own battles, ones I had overlooked in my eagerness to protect my brother. It dawned on me that the gossip which had initially driven a wedge between us now served as a gateway for true connection, a means through which we could strip away our facades and share our inner truths. At that moment, surrounded by the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the simple delight of a sunlit afternoon, I felt the bonds of family stretching and reshaping. We laughed gently as we reminisced about lighter memories, free from the weight of suspicion, and I could feel an invisible thread weaving us tighter together. My mom, watching this exchange with a quiet smile, seemed relieved to witness the evolution of our dynamic, as if years of tension were finally easing from her shoulders. It was a strange familiarity, one I hadn't realized I missed so deeply, where we could just be ourselves without hidden agendas or whispered worries. As our cups clinked in a toast to new beginnings, I felt a deep-seated hope rise within me. We were healing, yes, but it was more than that. We were rebuilding, a family not just forged from blood, but from shared experiences and a commitment to understanding one another in our most vulnerable states. We talked about future family gatherings and the kids we hoped to have, and for the first time, I envisioned Tara as an aunt, someone my children could look up to. It felt liberating to finally embrace the idea that the bond we were forming could stand resilient, even against the tides of uncertainty we had all faced. The cafe buzz faded into the background as I silently vowed to always prioritize honesty and openness in our conversations moving forward. Little did I know that this meeting was only the beginning of our transformation. As we stood to leave, our spirits lifted, I caught Tara's eye, a shared understanding passing between us that hinted at the shared journey ahead, a commitment to support each other, to embrace our differences, and to keep the channels of communication wide open. Life, with all its complexities, was stretching out before us like an uncharted path, and for the first time, I felt eager rather than apprehensive about the road ahead. What started as mere speculation had blossomed into a deeper narrative of family and resilience, reminding us all of the possibility that lies within trust and vulnerability. With that beautiful thought, I stepped out into the sunlit streets, my heart lighter than it had been in years, feeling as if I had not only gained a second sister-in-law but also a true friend. In the months that followed, conversations flourished, misunderstandings disintegrated, and what we had once regarded as gossip became the foundation upon which we built a family rich in understanding and love. It was in those quiet moments of sharing our lives, our fears, and our dreams that I realized this journey was worth every misstep, every whisper, and every moment I had doubted. Tara had secured her place in our family, and together we forged a connection that was resilient and transformative, one step at a time. However, as life in our family resumed its comfortably chaotic rhythm, a lingering thought occasionally flickered in the back of my mind, resembling a distant chime reminiscent of the earlier unease. I had learned so much from the experience of sharing my doubts and fears with both my mother and Tara, yet the fact that the whispers had once permeated our lives felt like a dark echo, reverberating in corners I couldn't quite reach. Sure, we had emerged from the shadows, but I sensed that the path to unshakable trust in our relationships was still a winding one filled with cobbled stones left over from prior storms. One dusky evening, as I sat curled in my favorite armchair with a mug of chamomile tea in hand, I felt a pang of anxiety pierce through the warm comfort of our newfound familial harmony. I began to wonder, what if Tara's past could come surging back into the spotlight? What if, in our quest for connection, we had overlooked the footprints of doubt that still lingered on the edges of our joy? Those thoughts found their way into our gatherings, muted but present. It was a sort of shadow that crept around the edges of our conversations. Tara remained vibrant and engaged but seemed weary at times, like a flower that flourishes under sunlight, yet sometimes craves rain, anticipating its own inner storms with cautious apprehension. My brother Daniel and Tara had begun planning their wedding, and with every small detail shared in our new group discussions, there was an undercurrent of tension, tugging uncomfortably at my thoughts. Was this a facade? Were they both displaying happiness while secretly struggling? I wanted so badly to trust in what we had cultivated. I felt I owed it to Tara, to Daniel, and to myself, to believe in this fresh start wholeheartedly. Then, one afternoon, as our conversations continued to grow easier with each coffee date and family gathering, my mother called me with an urgency that shattered my calm. "Can you come over? Tara is here, and I think she's having a rough time." The air suddenly thickened around me, tangling my senses into a web of concern and confusion. I hurried over, my heart racing in rhythm with my thoughts. Please, let this not be a step backward, I prayed silently as I drove through familiar streets now draped with an unease I had hoped was behind us. As I entered the house, I found Tara sitting in the living room, her face obscured by trembling hands, and my mother's eyes bright with unshed tears. Without needing words, I realized that this moment would determine if we could face any wave that life threw our way. Together, we could navigate through the tempestuous waters, or we could allow it to crash over us, unraveling our cherished connection. I settled beside Tara, taking a breath that felt like it carried the weight of my deepest fears. "It's okay to feel overwhelmed," I said gently, breaking the suffocating silence. In that moment, I prayed she would see my sincerity reflected in the depths of her own eyes. Slowly, Tara's shuddering breath steadied, and after the longest pause, she began to speak. Her voice trembled as she shared her insecurities, fears about the wedding, and the haunting doubts that echoed from her past. My heart ached to hear her struggles, yet I was grateful to witness her vulnerability. None of us were perfect, after all, and the beautiful tapestry of our lives was made richer by our imperfections. This unforeseen moment of honesty became a turning point. Instead of retreating into doubt, we leaned into our shared experiences, wrapping ourselves in understanding and compassion. The connection we had forged, mingled with the trials we faced, allowed us to weave our stories together tightly, creating not only a supportive circle but a sanctuary where we felt safe enough to wreck the facade of perfect happiness. From that day forward, I understood that our family was not just a collection of individuals expected to shine at all times. We were a constellation of glimmers and shimmers, quirks and quiet battles. With Tara by my side and my mother's unconditional love binding us together, we slowly unveiled each other's fears and dreams, transforming our past shadows into the light of awareness and compassion. I felt a renewed sense of hope fill my heart, reminding me that while the path may be winding, our willingness to be honest and vulnerable was the compass guiding us forward. The journey to healing is never linear, I learned. It's filled with dips and slides, with moments that may pull apart threads only to weave them closer again. Every time we face life's uncertainties together, I found solace in the realization that our love, our family bond, was worth the challenges. Moments of laughter mingled with tears became the framework of what family meant for us. As I reflected on our growth that night, an indelible thought struck me, echoing softly as I gradually drifted off to sleep. Even amidst the fragility of life, the strongest foundations are often built upon the honesty of shared experiences, nourishing the roots of love and friendship that grow resiliently with each passing moment. It was supposed to be just another holiday gathering, filled with laughter, festive decorations, and a bit too much eggnog, yet it transformed into one of the most pivotal moments of my life. My close-knit group of friends had established a tradition of a white elephant gift exchange, where the goal was to bring something humorous or quirky to swap around the circle. This year, I felt inspired. After days of thinking, I decided to gift a vintage-looking box, aged like an artifact, wrapped in gold foil that glimmered under the twinkling Christmas lights. Little did any of us know, it was more than just an old box. To everyone's amusement, when my best friend Alex unwrapped it, inside was a scratch-off lottery ticket I had thrown in on a whim, just to keep things lighthearted. Laughter erupted when he scratched it off only to find out that it was worth over $1 million. At that moment, it felt like I was in a fairy tale. Yet, as the initial shock began to fade, a heavy feeling settled in my stomach, as excitement morphed into uncertainty. For days, we celebrated, a party filled with playful banter, immense joy, and, surprisingly, stakes that transformed the bonds of friendship into something frayed and fragile. The conversation soon shifted from congratulatory remarks to some friends expressing that, because the winning ticket had originated from my white elephant gift, I had an obligation to share the wealth. After all, the ticket had not just sprung forth from thin air, it was part of a game played between us. I remember sitting at home in my small, cozy apartment that night, staring at the blinking light of my phone as the group chat erupted with opinions, judgments, and a sense of entitlement that rattled me to my core. I began to feel torn. On one hand, I wanted to help my friends, especially since they had been my support group through thick and thin, but on the other, it was a significant amount of money that I had never expected to see, and it felt deeply personal to me. As I continued to navigate the whirlwind of discussions, some of my friends took it a step further, outright demanding their share of my newfound fortune. They argued that I shouldn't have even included the ticket as part of the gift, highlighting how, as the giver, I had unintentionally created this awkward position. My doubts began to grow into whispers in my mind, trying to convince me that I was the one who was being selfish and greedy. Such thoughts gnawed at me, leading to sleepless nights, but I also cherished the idea that perhaps this money could help me rebuild my life. I had been stuck in a rut, toiling away in a mediocre job that barely paid enough to cover rent and bills, and now I could not only pay off my debts, but I could also travel, invest in furthering my career, and maybe even start on that overly ambitious dream of mine, opening a small bookstore cafe by the coast where stories would seep through the walls like sweet laughter. But the rift grew. The gifts from Christmas became burdens that I contemplated every waking moment. To distance myself from the conversations that blurred the lines of friendship, I withdrew from the group chat for a time, taking each day to regroup. I took long walks in the nearby park, letting the cool air fill my lungs while my mind wrestled with the notion of entitlement. I even visited an old bookstore to distract myself, where I could lose hours wandering between the bookshelves that smelled of musty paper and adventure. Eventually, after a week of wrestling with my thoughts, I decided to face my friends. I arranged a casual dinner, a final gathering to resolve our unspoken tension. As the evening unfolded, I chose to be honest. I sat them down, carefully explaining how the ticket had landed in a box meant solely for fun, devoid of the weight of expectations and obligations. I wanted to stress that while they were my dear friends, the money felt deeply personal to me, a newfound hope for my future. I could see their disappointment, and truthfully, it pierced me. The laughter that had once echoed around us now felt muted. However, I also saw glimmers of understanding in their eyes, and that conversation provided the resolution we so desperately needed. It wasn't about who deserved what, but about maintaining the bonds we had nurtured over the years. As the night wound down, one friend, Clara, who had always been the voice of reason, gave me a reflective look. She smiled softly and stated, "You know, sometimes life throws us surprises, not to be shared or divided, but to change our paths." It struck me deeply. That moment became a tapestry of emotions, a blend of relief, sadness, and resolve. I chose to embrace the good that the lottery had brought into my life while also holding steadfast to the relationships that mattered. In the weeks that followed, I found my footing. I still communicated with my friends, but now it was with less pressure, and whatever division had sprung eased with understanding and communication. Instead of sharing a part of my winnings, I offered to treat them to a weekend trip to celebrate our friendship without the strings of money. And in many ways, the act of spending time together felt even more fulfilling than any monetary exchange. In the end, it was not just about the lottery ticket but about navigating the complexities of relationships and choosing to value friendship over obligation. Ultimately, the lottery had not stripped me of friends but led me to reassess what truly mattered, the authenticity of connections that would thrive regardless of wealth. Update: a few months later, I took another little leap. I followed my heart and opened that bookstore cafe. It was cozy and beautifully chaotic, filled with shelves of stories inviting all who came in. I was pleasantly surprised when some friends offered to contribute their time and skills to help me shoulder the load. Clara even stepped up and helped design the space, jarred mugs with coded messages printed on the sides for the secret menu. There's joy in seeing the delight on people's faces as they step into a world of books and coffee. And on Saturdays, when the place is bustling, I've realized that my path hasn't just changed, it's blossomed into something altogether beautiful. But just as everything was coming together, a shadow loomed over my little haven of caffeine and literature. It was a few months after our grand opening when I received an unexpected call from my brother, Mark, who, after a string of misfortunes, had moved back in with our parents. "You won't believe it," he said, his voice brimming with excitement. "I bought a lottery ticket, and I actually won $50,000. I could hear the triumph behind his words, and part of me felt uplifted by his good fortune, but another part of me squirmed at the implications. After all, during that white elephant gift exchange a few weeks prior, we had used the ticket as just that, a joke among friends, something to pass around for laughs, like the ugly sweater no one wanted. The ticket had cost a mere $10, but now it had transformed into an unexpected fortune. The problem lingered in the back of my mind like an itch. Should I pay my brother back for that ticket? My first instinct was to smile and celebrate his success, acknowledging his hard luck turning into a windfall. However, as I watched the cafe thrive, my initial goodwill began to warp under the weight of guilt. I hadn't contributed anything to that silly ticket, nor had I envisioned sharing the wealth or what it might mean for my brother to suddenly have significant amounts of money. It shouldn't be a burdensome obligation, should it? The constant flirtation with self-doubt made my heart race. As I ruminated, I also felt a growing resentment rise against Mark. He was back with my parents, lacking direction, while I had pulled myself together to create something fulfilling. Every week, He kept bringing up potential ideas for what he could do with the winnings. A vacation. Then a new car. In those moments, I found myself resenting that $10 ticket more and more. Weeks passed, and I noticed more requests from Mark. While the cafe had become a green and nurturing space for creativity, Mark's intentions weighed heavy on me. "Why don't you just loan me a little bit to get started?" he'd suggest, each word slithering into my brain like smoke. "You can always recoup it after I get my business going." One afternoon, as I stirred the rich, dark coffee, my stomach twisted with anxiety. Clara noticed and stopped by with a gentle touch to my arm. "What's bothering you?" she asked, and I hesitated before spilling my thoughts like beans into a grinding machine. She listened quietly, concern knitting her brow. "You're not obligated to share anything," she said finally, taking a sip of her espresso, "but you shouldn't feel guilty if you want to help." But there was more to it. It was the emotional knot I had with Mark, our childhood, entwined in responsibility and rivalry. I resented the fact that he had the ability to get something for nothing while I had to build everything from my courage and sweat. One Thursday afternoon, I finally decided to confront him. "Listen, Mark," I started, holding the phone to my ear, feeling the warmth of the cafe's summer breeze danced around me. "I know you're excited about your winnings, and I'm happy for you, but you need to understand. I can't help with your plans. That ticket was never mine to claim or share." His silence felt heavy, a moment too long before he spoke. "Wow, so that's it?" The chill in his tone froze me in place. It felt dreadful but necessary to stand firm, to balance the weight of harsh truth with the buoyancy of love. "But it's my ticket," he continued defiantly. "You were there when I bought it. It's not just luck, I could have picked another ticket, you know? Be better. Be supportive." With every word he poured out, my resolve thinned. "I'm trying to be supportive, Mark, but you can't expect me, of all people, to just distribute money when I'm still figuring out my own life." Somehow, I managed to hang up without feeling like a complete jerk, and as I processed the conversation, I finally felt a flicker of relief. Time passed, and the confrontation became a raw, necessary wound that slowly healed. Through the simmering tension with my brother, I found clarity about my own dreams. The cafe continued to thrive, filled with laughter, warmth, and the soft scent of beans roasting in the back. Clara became my confidant, and together we hosted small writing workshops, each word crafted under the light of connection. Despite the distance with Mark, I began to accept that his choices were his own, separate from my journey, as I found empowerment in the depths of the rooted relationships I built day by day. Months later, I received a text from Mark, one that was devoid of the old bitterness. "Hey, I went on a little trip. It was great. Hope the cafe's doing well," he wrote. A simple note that felt woven with maturity and intent. I responded, letting him know how much the cafe had grown. I didn't owe him anything, and while our relationship became more distant over time, I couldn't help but feel a thread of hope weaving back through our connection, fragile yet promising, just like the very venture I cherished. As I stood behind the counter one morning, with sunlight spilling golden rays through the window, I realized that sometimes, making choices for your happiness meant letting go of guilt, a lesson I hoarded quietly as I breathed in the intoxicating aroma of roasted beans and fresh stories yet to be told. The cafe continued to flourish, much to my delight. I leaned into the rhythm of each day, where the sound of the door chiming would greet me with the promise of new connections. One particularly crisp morning, I found myself overwhelmed with gratitude as I greeted regulars and newcomers. Alike, their smiles infectious, the aroma of brewing coffee wrapping around us like a soft blanket. Clara had this way of lighting up the room whenever she walked in. She carried an energy that was both calming and invigorating. That day, however, felt different. A magnetic energy buzzed beneath the ordinary hustle and bustle. I was preparing for a community event, one that Clara had suggested to foster deeper ties with our patrons. We decided to host a monthly open mic night, where writers, musicians, and poets could showcase their talents, a showcase of voices competing only with the sound of clattering mugs and warm laughter. It was during our final preparations, stringing fairy lights above the circular tables and piling chairs in cozy arrangements, that I noticed Jason standing outside the cafe, hands shoved deep in his pockets with that same familiar expression etched across his features, a mix of longing and hesitation. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. No matter how far our lives had drifted apart, the sight of him brought back a whirlwind of memories and a rush of old emotions. For a moment, I debated whether to invite him inside, but the fog of uncertainty clouded my decision. As the evening wore on and the cafe came alive, untouched notes filled the air, voices weaving tales both heartwarming and haunting. Clara's infectious laughter faded in and out as I caught glimpses of familiar faces sharing moments, and then, almost as if time had folded, Jason stepped through the door. The room hushed momentarily, strangers turned into an audience, and I felt my pulse quicken. He looked around, his eyes searching, and landed on me with a gaze so earnest that it melted the seconds into something palpable. I couldn't help but manage a weak smile, my heart oscillating between pleasure and panic. After the first act concluded, he approached me, and I could feel the vibrations of my surroundings dim, the clinking glasses and buzzing chatter fading into the backdrop of our shared history. "I came to see you," he confessed, his voice the same as I remembered but laced with a timbre of vulnerability I hadn't noticed before. I blinked, struggling for words. Here we stood, transformed by time, yet the undercurrents of unspoken sentiments lingered in the air like a fine mist. I asked him how he had found me, and the conversation spilled out like secrets carefully hoarded, revealing pieces of our lives since we last made contact. He told me about his trials, struggles with his decisions, and how he'd realized the importance of relationships that once mattered to him. Encouraging him to join the open mic crowd, I found myself eased by the moment. The fear I had pinpointed as regret fell softly as he stepped up to perform, seemingly transformed by the acceptance that enveloped him. As he shared his heartfelt song, the audience felt like a gentle embrace, and I couldn't help but lose myself in the harmony that wove through the room. There was beauty in the shared experience. It reminded me that reconciliation doesn't always seek perfection, but requires vulnerability and openness to growth. Our paths, so differently aligned, had somehow allowed us to converge again, revealing that understanding could form new threads, stitching old pains with the fabric of compassion. By the time the last act settled and the cafe's light began to dim, Jason and I found ourselves enveloped in a tranquil embrace of understanding. As I locked up and waved goodbye to the last lingering customers, who unfurled their stories into the night, I felt lighter than I had in a long time. Perhaps, I mused, mistakes didn't have to be anchors but rather lessons gently guiding us toward growth and renewal. With the sweet taste of coffee lingering in my mouth and the warmth of rekindled connection bubbling in my chest, I closed the door behind me, knowing that life would never cease to surprise me with its exquisite range of possibilities. I fell into a contemplative silence as I reflected on the day's unfolding, grateful not just for the cafe, but for the chance encounters and unpredictable paths that lead us back to where we truly belong, whether with friends old or new, wrapped in the comfort of second chances. When I received the news that my older sister, Claire, had to move back in with our parents, something deep inside me told me that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't fathom at the moment. I'm Emma, the youngest of three, and my relationship with Claire has always been a rocky one. Sure, we had shared laughter and tears growing up, but there was something about her larger-than-life persona that often overshadowed my quieter, more reserved disposition. I had built a life for myself, a snug little apartment in the heart of the city with a decent job that allowed me to pay my bills while still enjoying a few luxuries here and there. So when my parents called with concern edging their voices, explaining that Claire had been laid off and needed a place to stay temporarily, I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. They explained how Claire would contribute financially to the household, which seemed reasonable on the surface, but as the weeks passed, it became disappointingly clear that this was not going to be a temporary arrangement. The first indication of the shift came one afternoon when I casually visited my parents. Walking through the familiar doorway, I was immediately engulfed in a whirl of mismatched furniture and the uniquely cluttered chaos of their living room. It felt different now. Claire had rearranged the space, filling it with scattered boxes, remnants of her previous life. She greeted me with the same beaming smile, but I could sense an underlying tension, a whisper of irritation hanging in the air like an uninvited guest. We exchanged pleasantries that felt stilted and awkward, and it quickly became apparent that her presence was overshadowing mine. It didn't take long for her to bring up the topic of finances, how my parents were struggling to keep up with their mortgage payments while trying to help her get back on her feet. It was a tough conversation that had me feeling cornered, like they expected me to take action. I found myself drowning in guilt, torn between helping my family and maintaining my own sense of independence. They mentioned how my contribution to the mortgage would ease their burdens and allow Claire more time to get a new job, framing it as a family obligation that I simply couldn't escape. After all, right? Family sticks together. The idea of throwing money their way felt like a no-brainer, but I couldn't help but wonder if Claire would truly be grateful or if she would instead see it as another opportunity to lean on me while I struggled to maintain my budding career. I mulled over it for days, and with each passing moment, the thought of participating in this financial strain more than I had anticipated grew heavier. It wasn't just my money at stake, it was my mental space, my comfort, and my sense of security that was being tested. As the weeks turned to months, the stress festered. A particularly low evening found me swirling through the darkness of my mind, battling with the anxiety of homeownership versus my sense of familial duty. Claire continued to thrive in the chaotic comfort of our parents' home, her laughter echoing through the walls while I sat alone in my dimly lit apartment, feeling the distance grow. I pondered my worth in our family dynamic and felt torn between my urge to support them and my instinct to protect my own growing future. When confrontation finally loomed, it exploded into one dramatic night over a family dinner where we sat across the table, Claire alight with engaging stories from her day while I quietly picked at the cold pasta on my plate. In a moment of frustration, I voiced my feelings about not wanting to pay the mortgage. The air turned electric, and for the first time, Claire's mask slipped slightly, revealing a flicker of genuine indignation. "It's not just my responsibility," I asserted, a shaky confidence underlined by the crack in my voice. She was taken aback, and for a moment, I wondered if I had finally clarified my stance, but instead, all hell broke loose. I witnessed an explosion of accusations hurled between Claire and me, sharp words clattering like glass breaking. My parents, caught in the crossfire, tried to mediate, but I felt less like a daughter and more like a burden. Heat rose in my chest as Claire accused me of selfishness, while I voiced my feelings of unappreciation and betrayal. It was a raw, painful argument, and when it finally fizzled out, I couldn't shake off the suffocating realization that I wasn't sure if I could ever go back to the way things were, or if I wanted to. I excused myself that night, feeling more isolated than ever, and upon returning to my apartment, I fell into a deep, restless sleep, punctuated with dreams of family betrayals and financial obligations that loomed over me like dark clouds. Days blended into weeks until I finally decided to distance myself from the toxic cycle of guilt and anger. I started to think critically about my own wants and needs. I drafted a letter to my parents, outlining my decision not to contribute to the mortgage, hoping it would provide clarity for all of us. It was written with a tense love, filled with the emotional depth of someone who desperately wanted to reconnect but felt trapped by the dynamics set years ago. I explained that I loved them all dearly, but I could no longer sacrifice my own stability for their peace. The letters found their way to my parents, and although the response wasn't immediately warm, my parents at least acknowledged my courage to stand my ground. Claire, however, took it harder than I expected. Her phone call that followed was rife with anger and misunderstanding, yet I felt something shift. Instead of clashing, I allowed her to express herself while I calmly responded, and to my surprise, her tone softened. Weeks turned to months. Though our relationship didn't magically mend, it did begin to evolve towards something more honest. Claire ultimately found a new job that stabilized her income, and while it took time, we began to rebuild the bridge our family needed. I learned that sometimes, a stand for myself did not stem from selfishness but from a place of deep self-respect. That unanticipated reflection taught me the art of balance, how love can coexist with boundaries. And while the discussion of finances still hung in the air like a specter, our family unit began to resonate with a different tone, a more supportive, understanding one. I shared this story with a friend as we laughed about the ridiculousness of our familial dynamics. And the strangest thing happened. Claire popped into my thoughts, reminding me that, sometimes, the way you navigate conflict can redefine relationships, even if it feels contentious at first. As I lay in bed that night, the shadows of previous conflicts melted into the hush of my room, and I reveled in the soft glow of acceptance I felt. Maybe, in facing the storm together, we had each become stronger, more resilient. I would continue to carve my own path and embrace the complexity of love with boundaries, wrapped in the possibility of new beginnings and stronger ties. So, was I the asshole? Maybe, for a moment, but that moment helped safeguard my heart and nurture a family connection that was worth every ounce of struggle. As days turned into weeks, the dynamics at home shifted like the ebb and flow of the ocean tides, and I could feel the undertow of change swirling around me. My sister's presence had transformed the atmosphere. The house was no longer just a shell echoing with silent resentments and unspoken words but was now filled with laughter, late-night conversations, and the occasional argument over whose turn it was to take out the trash. I caught myself glancing at her when I thought she wasn't watching, noticing the way she'd laugh at her own silly jokes or how her eyes would shimmer when she spoke about her work. I felt a flicker of warmth, the kind I hadn't allowed myself to embrace in years. I wondered if this was the unfamiliar sound of healing, an orchestra assembling after decades of discordant notes, each of us tentatively racing our instruments to join the symphony. Yet, Beneath this newly woven tapestry lay a knot of tension that refused to loosen. The impending reality of our parents' financial situation loomed over us like dark clouds on the horizon. They had worked tirelessly to keep a roof over our heads, sacrificing much for a sense of security that now seemed delicate. I couldn't shake off the guilt swirling in my gut, an insistent reminder that my own independence had inadvertently contributed to the distance growing between my family and our responsibilities. We were all learning to navigate these choppy waters together, bound by a shared sense of duty, but the question echoed in my mind: was I responsible for saving us from drowning? One crisp autumn evening, as the sun began to dip below the trees, painting the sky in rich oranges and purples, I took a walk to gather my thoughts. I needed clarity. I found myself wandering to the coffee shop down the street, a cozy little place filled with the aroma of freshly brewed beans and the soft hum of conversations that somehow made my worries feel lighter. As I sipped my cappuccino, I overheard a couple discussing their struggles with family dynamics, and it struck me how universal our experiences were. That was when I realized I wasn't alone, that this shared pain, this negotiation of love and obligation, resonated beyond the walls of our family. When I returned home, a darkness was hanging in the air. My parents had decided to have the talk about their mortgage again. As they gathered us around the dining room table, I could see the worry etched into their faces, lines deepening like cracks in a porcelain vase, beautiful but fragile. They explained how the financial burden had grown heavier since my sister had moved in, how they had hoped the extra help would ease their situation, but instead it felt like an anchor dragging us all down. I could feel my heart racing, the old defenses rising up like walls starting to thicken around me again. I didn't want to fight, I wanted to connect, but the words seemed to stick in my throat. Finally, I spoke up, my voice steady but soft. What if we came together to plan this out? I want to help. The room fell silent, each of us in our thoughts, the tension a thick, almost tangible fog. My sister's eyes lit up, and for a moment, the lightness from the coffee shop danced back into the room. We frantically brainstormed ideas, pooling resources like a patchwork quilt, slowly stitching together something new. It was in that moment that I felt a compelling shift, a sturdy thread, woven through the fabric of our relationships, an undeniable connection that reminded us we were all part of the same tapestry. As the weeks passed, we fine-tuned our household budget, and while some days were harder than others, we managed to claw back the control that had slipped from our fingers. The burden didn't evaporate, but sharing it made it bearable. The night before my parents were set to meet with their mortgage lender, I found myself curled up with my sister on the couch, a bowl of popcorn between us while we binge-watched our favorite show. The laughter flowed between us, and for the first time in so long, I felt free, unconfined by our past but tethered to something new and beautiful. When morning came, as the birds chirped their daily greetings, I caught an early glimpse of my parents, standing tall against the dawn, ready to face the day. They seemed more resolute, the worry less visible as they exchanged quiet words. I knew we had moved past the point of being the assholes. We hadn't just weathered the storm, we had learned to dance in the rain, to let the drops wash away our fears, and we emerged, messy, imperfect, but undeniably united. Looking back, I realized that my initial reluctance to pay the mortgage had stemmed from a place of self-preservation and misunderstanding, but it quietly evolved into an opportunity for growth. In acknowledging my boundaries, I learned the importance of balance and the strength of family, and that love isn't just about sacrifice, it's about sharing, supporting, and ultimately embracing the complex layers that knit us together. So, was I the asshole? Not anymore. Just a person learning to navigate the beautiful chaos of family ties, tangled yet stronger for the journey we shared. As for an update, life continues to unfold in unexpected ways. A couple of months later, my parents expressed their gratitude, our collective efforts had eased their burden, and they even started discussing investments in their favorite hobbies again. My sister and I grew closer, sharing our lives, guiding one another, and at times, still butting heads. Yet, each argument only served as an avenue for growth, a chapter added to our story. I think, in the quiet moments of reflection, that's the beauty of family. It's messy, sometimes frustrating, but amidst all that chaos, we often find our way back to each other. And really, isn't that what matters most? As I settled into this new rhythm of life, I noticed how the air felt different in our home. It was lighter, infused with the sense of camaraderie that had blossomed between my sister and me. On weekends, our kitchen filled with the sense of baking bread and simmering sauces, an orchestra of sound as we attempted new recipes together. But it wasn't all flour and laughter, the undercurrents of tension could still surface. I remember one particularly rainy Saturday afternoon when the sky mirrored our mood. I had returned home after a long week of work, exhausted and craving solitude. Instead, I found my sister hosting an impromptu gathering of her friends. The din of youthful laughter and music pulsed through the house, and I felt my heart thrum uneasily in my chest. I was torn between the discomfort of intrusion and the warmth of familial support in their laughter, which echoed off the walls like constant reminders of choices I didn't quite understand. Concealed within the whirlwind of my thoughts was the nagging feeling that the strides we had made had somehow become entangled with my sister's demands. As the chaos of her life spilled into our shared space, I found myself feeling suffocated by the very familial bond I had craved. When I finally mustered the courage to address it, my sister, caught off guard, was defensive. "You used to be so welcoming," she challenged, and I could sense the shadows of our past struggles creeping in. Inherently, this was a moment of vulnerability for both of us, and as the silence hung heavy before me, I realized it wasn't just about me needing space, it was also about her needing to assert her independence in this shared space. After what felt like an eternity of misunderstanding, we sat down, nursing cups of tea, the clamor of her friends fading into the background. I spoke my truth, gentle yet firm. "I love having you here, but I need a little room to breathe sometimes." I watched as her expression softened, the realization dawning on her like the morning sun breaking through the clouds. "I get it," she finally said, her voice laced with empathy. "I'm still figuring this out too." From there, we laid the groundwork for a new kind of understanding, one that delicately balanced my need for tranquility with her vibrant, chaotic energy. We established times for her gatherings, leaving pockets of silence for both introspection and connection. As months slipped by like the autumn leaves falling gently from the trees outside, our family dynamic eased into a rhythm that felt right. With the festive season approaching, my parents decided to host a holiday dinner, hoping to gather everyone, both a celebration of the many transformations we had weathered and a nod to the community we had formed. We'd always traded off holidays with each other, but this year felt different. It pulsed with undercurrents of genuine appreciation. As the table filled with food and laughter, I observed the way my sister's friends mingled effortlessly with our family, an intertwined tapestry of relationships. Each conversation brought forth stories, inherited laughter, the kind born from shared histories and new experiences alike. But amidst the joy, I saw the familiar glint of tension creeping into the room as my parents expressed worry over their lingering mortgage, a detail I had hoped to keep under wraps. My sister, well-intentioned yet impulsive, enthusiastically shared ideas for a crowdfunding initiative to help with expenses. The way my parents' glimmers with confused hesitation only added weight to the conversation. I felt the room pulse with apprehension as layers of unspoken concern layered themselves upon my heart. Stepping in, I breathed deeply, drawing from the wisdom that had built itself over months of navigating rough waters together. "Let's talk this through as a family," I suggested, knowing we could find common ground. We always had. The discussion that followed was cathartic and revealing, each family member presenting their views, fears woven seamlessly into a tapestry of resolution. Finally, we reached an understanding that eased all our hearts, an agreement to pool resources into a family fund that would alleviate some stress while allowing my parents to invest in their passions. It opened the door to a more significant discussion about finances, futures, and the shared desire to support one another. Sitting around that holiday table, the glows of fairy lights expertly littering the room flickered, mirroring the warmth in our hearts. I understood, in that moment, reassurance and growth can coexist, just as laughter and arguments can. Our journey had only begun to blossom, intricate and beautiful, revealing itself as we paid attention and cared for one another, an ever-evolving chapter filled with love. It was a moment of profound truth for me. Maybe, in allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and honest, in navigating the messy underbelly of family life, we had built something sturdier than any foundation of separate lives. We had stitched a quilt of resilience, forever learning, forever growing, bound not by blood, but by our commitment to each other. It was one of those gray mornings when the world felt like a barely awake dream, and I had just settled into my favorite corner of the couch, coffee cradled in hand, when my phone buzzed with a message that shifted my entire day into a realm of unplanned chaos. My sister, Emily, was in a bind again. My heart sank a little because knowing her, this would not be a small request. She had 2 kids under the age of 5, an energetic whirlwind and a determined toddler, and I loved them both fiercely, though I often felt the weight of responsibility to support her. "Hey, can you watch the kids for a few hours? I've got a last-minute appointment," the text read, and in my mind, I could already picture the screen light illuminating her frazzled expression. I took a sip of my coffee, the warmth spreading through me, and started weighing my options. I wanted to help Emily, I really did. But I had plans, simple ones, just a day to myself to recharge, something I desperately needed after weeks of emotional labor from work. I sat there, contemplating everything, the guilt of saying no, the responsibility that would flicker into my reality should I agree, and the nagging realization that I hadn't met her needs on countless other occasions. Every time she counted on me, it felt a little more like a betrayal of my own needs if I couldn't deliver, just one more notch in the ever-growing tally of my unreliability. With a heavy sigh, I typed back, "I'm so sorry. I really can't today." The regret washed over me almost instantly, as if the warmth of my coffee had become cold. Minutes later, my phone buzzed again, and I braced myself for the emotional cascade that often followed our brief conversations. "You never can you?" Her response was immediate and cut like glass. I could almost hear the hurt in her voice through the screen. A flood of guilt crashed over me. "That's not fair. I'm trying to take care of myself, too," I replied, my fingers hurried but relating each word slowly, as if negotiating my way through a minefield of familial expectation and personal boundaries. We exchanged a few more texts, each tugging at the strings of obligation and disappointment, until the conversation crumbled into silence. I put my phone aside, but it sat there like a weight on my chest, the consequences of my decision ricocheting in my mind. I knew Emily was overwhelmed, that she felt isolated in her parenting journey, but I also felt a flicker of resentment growing. It wasn't just about her, this was about me, reclaiming my space. As the day rolled on, clouds drifted across the sky outside, matching my indecisiveness. I still felt tinged with guilt, yet a little relief flickered with it, and I tried to settle in, allowing myself to embrace the calm, yet I couldn't shake the familiar thought, am I the asshole here? In the days that followed, Emily stopped texting me as much. I caught glimpses of her life through social media, great family outings I was absent from, playground, playdates, motherly milestones. It gnawed at me. Had I really chosen my own comfort over supporting her through her storms? One late afternoon, as autumn leaves began swirling down like soft whispers outside, I decided to confront my feelings. I invited Emily over. When she arrived, I opened the door to a face that mirrored a combination of exhaustion and irritation. The tension hung thick between us like a stubborn spider web. Instead of tiptoeing around our recent distance, I invited her to sit down, poured us some fresh coffee, and admitted how I felt, my fears about not being enough, my struggles with selfishness, and the fatigue that sometimes consumed my every thought. To my surprise, she revealed her own struggles, how isolating parenting could be, how she sometimes felt like she was flailing, and how, in those moments of needing help, she often turned to me simply because I was family. This raw honesty broke the tension in the room, revealing a more profound connection between us than I had first believed. By the end of that conversation, we weren't just siblings discussing obligations, we were two people trying to navigate the murky waters of adulthood while balancing the people we loved with the need to care for ourselves. Almost instinctively, we agreed to do better, to lean on each other without judgment, and reshape the lines of expectation into something a bit more fluid. The journey to reforge our relationship wasn't a single moment but rather a series of conversations gently steering us back to empathy and understanding. Weeks passed, and although not every moment was perfect, gradually we learned how to share the load better. Sometimes she would find a babysitter, and I'd take the kids for some weekend fun, and at other times, I took a step back when I needed, trusting that Emily could lean on other friends or resources as well. In reflection, I found that prioritizing my own space did not make me an antagonist in Emily's story, but rather a supportive character learning how to also embrace vulnerability. Recently, she sent me a text that read, "Thanks for being so you," which filled me with a warmth I hadn't expected. Not an update of resentment, but one of acknowledgement and love. There are still days where that same guilt creeps back in, where I wonder if there's a balance I haven't struck, but I've found peace in knowing we're both trying, and perhaps that's enough in our labyrinth of life. As I settled into bed that night, the soft glow of my bedside lamp casting a calming light over the stacks of books lining my shelves, I reflected on the journey I had taken with my sister, Emily. That text she sent a few days ago, "Thanks for being so you," felt like a lifeline thrown to me in the turbulent waters of familial expectations and personal limitations. It was a stark contrast to the earlier exchanges we had, when my attempts to carve out my own space in life often clashed with what she deemed necessary, especially as a single mother juggling the demands of work and parenting. I thought back to the times when my refusal to step in as a backup babysitter left her frustrated, and I could almost feel the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. But how could I have been her safety net when my own foundation felt shaky, working through my goals while navigating an ever-evolving sense of self? I learned that while my role was to support, it wasn't to stretch myself so thin that it risked fraying everything I had worked so hard to build. As the light of day dimmed, I listened to the soft hum of the world outside my window, a calming backdrop that echoed my thoughts. Each car that passed, each distant bark from a neighbor's dog, reminded me of the life swirling around me, full of responsibilities and the comforting chaos of family ties. Despite my internal struggles, I tried my best to communicate with Emily, to be honest about where I was emotionally. I remembered the awkward but necessary heart-to-heart we had, sitting on her living room couch surrounded by crayon drawings and scattered toys, an oasis of her life's beautiful mess. I could almost laugh at how we both fumbled with our words, wanting to express our love without resentment spilling out, but eventually, the floodgates opened, and we found grounding in mutual support. Our relationship became a tapestry woven with understanding and adjustment. Each thread was a decision not made in haste but rather inspired by the hope that our bond could foster growth in both our lives. I couldn't always be the safety net she hoped for, but I was willing to be her cheering section, the one who brought a batch of homemade cookies when she was drowning in laundry or offered to listen to her rants about an exhausting day, reminding her to breathe through it. That text was more than gratitude. It felt like we were negotiating contracts of care instead of burdens of obligation, which was liberating in its own right. Now that tranquility rested in the acknowledgement of our roles, I felt lighter despite the hints of apprehension that occasionally lingered in my heart. Closing my eyes, I drifted into a dream where we freely shared laughter and affection without the shadows of guilt haunting our corners. It was both nurturing and freeing, a reminder that as we navigate our labyrinth, it could be filled with the joy of discovery rather than the weight of expectations. Whenever I woke to whispers of doubt, I'd pull that text from the recesses of my memory. Thanks for being so you. It became my mantra, a gentle nudge to remind me that sometimes, just being there authentically is enough to stitch the frayed edges of our connection back together. And perhaps, in the quiet lessons learned through this journey, we both were becoming stronger characters in our intertwined stories, navigating the winding paths and discovering the beauty in our vulnerabilities. As I settled into this newfound understanding of our relationship, I began to embrace the small moments between Emily and me with a deeper appreciation. It was during one of these moments, a lazy Sunday afternoon, that I found myself sprawled out on the couch, a warm mug of chamomile tea cradled in my hands while rain pattered softly against the window. Emily had come over with her daughter, 4-year-old Mia, a lively bundle of energy who could simultaneously brighten the room and leave it in delightful chaos. Mia, with her wild curls bouncing and eyes sparkling with curiosity, flitted around, exploring the various knickknacks that adorned my shelves. I watched her from my cozy spot, a gentle smile on my face, as Emily sat cross-legged on the floor, her fingers moving skillfully to thread colorful beads onto string for an arts and crafts project they had spontaneously decided upon. The dull thrum of guilt that had followed me like a shadow began to dissipate as my sister and her daughter filled the living room with laughter. Emily glanced up occasionally, her expression soft with gratitude as if to say, "Thank you for opening your space to us." I could see the way Mia's cheeks glowed with excitement and how careful she was in choosing the next bead, pondering the shades and textures with an artist's precision. In that moment, my heart swelled. I realized that being present didn't always mean sacrificing my own needs. Sometimes, it meant simply allowing space for love to flow, like the colors of beads stringing together into something beautiful. As the afternoon wore on, the rain transitioned from a gentle sprinkle to a full downpour, and with the sound of rain drumming against the roof, we retreated to the kitchen, a familiar laughter mixing with the aroma of cookies baking in the oven. I knew I had nothing planned beyond the two of them being there, and as I gathered the ingredients, flour, sugar, chocolate chips, and an old, well-loved mixing bowl, I felt a surge of happiness. A quiet sense of belonging washed over me, and I couldn't help but think that this was precisely how connections could mend, through shared experiences, laughter, and the simplicity of being together. Later, as we sat around the table, cookies cooling on a rack, I felt a sudden need to express my vulnerability to Emily. I took a breath, my hands enveloping the warm mug once more, and spoke about that lingering guilt, the part of me that worried I'd never be reliable enough. I confessed that while I loved them both dearly, I sometimes felt like I was failing at being a sister and an aunt. Emily listened, her brow furrowing slightly, the afternoon light casting gentle shadows across her face. When I finished, a weight lifted, revealing a tender side of our relationship, the understanding that came from sharing. "Hey," she said softly, "we're both learning as we go. I don't expect you to be my safety net, and I'm sorry if I've ever put that pressure on you. Her words washed over me, a balm to my soul. In the days that followed, our bond deepened. Further. From impromptu movie nights to phone calls that stretched late into the night fueled by wine and laughter, I noticed a shift. The overwhelming fear of inadequacy loosened its grip on me, revealing an openness that allowed us both to express our needs without fear of judgment. It was liberating, a dance under the stars of empathy, where we both hesitated and stumbled yet continued to step in time. When Emily called one day, her voice edged with excitement, I hadn't expected her to ask for my help more intentionally. I have a conference next week, and I need someone to watch Mia, would you consider it? I felt a surge of panic at the thought of being responsible for a child, but then I remembered how far we'd come. I'd love to, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. The birth of that new chapter in our sibling relationship transformed the tension into anticipation. The day arrived, and I found myself preparing my modest apartment for Mia with the fervor of a holiday preparation. I can still hear the muffled sound of her laughter echoing down the hallway when she arrived, her tiny shoes squeaking against the floor bringing a warmth to my heart. For the next 2 days, our lives became one joyous whirlwind of crayons, storybooks, and creative messes, reminding me that while I may not have been the most traditional caretaker, I could still be present, still be significant. On the last evening of her stay, Mia and I found ourselves on the floor, surrounded by a halo of half-finished drawings and toys. She looked up at me, her big brown eyes wide with wonder, and asked, "Can we stay like this forever?" Her innocence stung my heart, a reminder of the fleeting nature of childhood innocence. Embracing her just for that moment seemed like a promise to always be a part of her life. Once Emily returned, her face carried both weariness and joy, and when she saw the chaos of toys scattered around, she raised an eyebrow playfully. "Did you survive?" I laughed, realizing that the laughter woven through those brief days had created a tapestry of memories neither of us could have anticipated. That feeling of warmth swelled again as Mia clung to my legs, reluctant to leave, and her pleas were enough to keep my spirits high. As I waved them goodbye, a sense of bittersweet nostalgia settled over me. I thought of that earlier text, a digital reminder of acceptance, and I embraced the space we'd created together. Our labyrinth was no longer just filled with turns and obstacles but rich with color, unspoken love, and the assurance that we were both persistent travelers, constantly rediscovering each other, one cookie and laughter-filled day at a time. And with every twist, every pause we took, I understood that we weren't just making it through, we were crafting the story of us, a story worth telling for years to come. It's strange how success can turn familiar faces into strangers, and I found that out the hard way. Just 3 years ago, I was scraping by, working endless hours for a salary that barely covered my bills, while dreaming up my own tech startup. I had wrestled with self-doubt. My wife Lily's family often reminded me of my shortcomings in the most subtle, backhanded ways. During family gatherings, I could always count on Grandma Marge to chuckle lightly and say, "Oh, sweetie, maybe when you grow up you'll find a real job." Or there was my brother-in-law Dave, who would mention my entrepreneurial dreams with an eye roll, citing the statistics of failed startups over a whiskey glass that glinted like a mocking star. They thought they were being jovial, but the undercurrent of disdain was unmistakable, and though I always laughed it off, deep down, it hurt. After countless late-night brainstorming sessions, those sleepless nights turned into something tangible. I launched my company and, against all odds, it began to flourish. I found my stride, hiring talented individuals, attracting investors, and suddenly, the landscape of my life had transformed overnight. As my bank account swelled and the aura of success enveloped me, I was astonished by the way my in-laws began to treat me. It felt as if their earlier skepticism had turned into sudden affection, their calls more frequent, their invitations more insistent. They would ask me for advice on their own ventures. Dave needed help with his small electronics shop, while Marge requested funding for her local charity. At first, I thought it was great. Surely this is what family does, right? We lift each other up. But after a while, the old feelings of resentment resurfaced. Their previous comments echoed in my mind each time I received a new request. I dug deep into myself and realized I was no longer the person they had always looked down on. One bittersweet afternoon, while I savored a cup of coffee and stared out the window at the busy street below, I made my decision. From that moment on, I stopped aiding them. No more money, no more advice, nothing. I felt a strange mix of liberation and guilt. How could I justify this? Was I really an asshole for wanting to distance myself from their past condescension? I recounted to Lily what I had done, my heart heavy with fear of her reaction. She was quiet for a long time, then she simply asked me how I felt about it. I admitted that I felt empowered, but I also worried that it made me unkind, perhaps unforgiving. "You deserve the respect you've earned," she finally said, reaching out to squeeze my hand. It was reassuring, but the nagging doubt remained. Soon enough, Thanksgiving rolled around, and the air was thick with tension. As expected, they were all too eager to reunite and discuss my success over turkey and stuffing, but I felt like a ghost at my own table. All the smiles felt forced, their inquiries laced with a touch of desperation and inadequacy. When Grandma Marge asked for a loan to help refurbish her house, I simply smiled and said I couldn't, that I was focusing my resources on my business. The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically see them reeling, struggling to reconcile the image of the once struggling me with the successful version I had now become. It dawned on me that perhaps they feared my rise. I had become the embodiment of everything they used to mock. Eventually, the evening wore on with awkward conversation and strained laughter. It seemed the air of pretension engulfed us, heavier than the dishes piled around the table. As we said our goodbyes, Grandma whispered, "You know, sweetie, it's good to see you doing well. Just remember, family is everything." I nodded, but inside, I felt a strange emptiness, a realization that maybe it wasn't that simple for me anymore. Days turned into weeks, and as I walked the fine line between emotional isolation and newfound freedom, I wavered between self-assurance and regret. I still thought of those family gatherings, how they had shifted so drastically, like falling leaves, beautiful yet tragic. A few months later, after a long day of work, I received a message from Dave, revealing the struggles he faced with his shop. In a moment of weakness, I contemplated extending my hand again, but then recalled those biting words from the past. Choosing to stay true to my convictions brought a sense of solace and resoluteness. So, I crafted a balanced response, offering a single piece of advice. Stay determined. You have it in you to succeed. It was an echo, a reassurance of what I had once been. As I laid down that night, I realized I might not be the one in the wrong. Sometimes, severing ties isn't unloving, it's an act of self-preservation. And who knows? Maybe one day we could find a way back to each other. Maybe their perceptions would change, perhaps mine would too. With that thought, I drifted into a dream, a serene visage of hope amidst uncertainty. Update: several months later, I've been contacted again by my in-laws, this time more amiable, with heartfelt apologies and a recognition of their previous behavior. They've actually sought out some of my advice for their own businesses, and while I remain cautious, I'm willing to extend a hand again, just a little. Maybe the road to healing is slow and winding, but I'm finding peace in this journey. As the months rolled on, I often found myself reflecting on those turbulent times with my in-laws. Their negativity had loomed like a shadow over my accomplishments, dampening the pride I felt in my newfound success. Yet, as I watched my own business flourish, I began to ponder whether their critique had been more a projection of their insecurities than a true measure of my worth. I used to dread family gatherings, worrying that I'd have to endure their condescension, but now there hung this strange possibility in the air, an olive branch of sorts. When I received the message from my sister-in-law, I felt a mix of anticipation and caution. Her words were different this time, dripping with sincerity and regret, a stark contrast to the disbelief I had grown accustomed to. "Can we talk? We've been thinking a lot about everything," she typed, and each word pulled at a thread of hope I had nearly severed. That evening, I decided to meet her for coffee, carrying the weight of my reservations like a heavy cloak. As I walked into that familiar cafe, the scent of roasted beans enveloped me, grounding me as I scanned the room for her. When our eyes met, I noticed the tremor in her hands. It mirrored how I felt inside. Practically tiptoeing around the remnants of past grievances, we exchanged pleasantries before she dove in, expressing how their thoughts had shifted. "We've watched you grow from afar. It wasn't fair to judge you the way we did, and I realize now how deeply I misrepresented you," she confessed, sincerity shining in her eyes, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of empathy surface for her struggles. Listening to her recount her own setbacks and the toll they had taken on her self-esteem, a part of me shifted as well, as I understood that we all wrestle with our defeats. I shared my experience, too, describing the pressure of climbing the ladder of success alone, a journey filled with both exhilaration and loneliness. As we spoke, the barrier between us began to dissolve, but the lingering distrust still lingered like an uninvited guest. Nonetheless, I sensed a desire for reconciliation growing, patchwork stitching together the ripped seams of family loyalty. Later, when I returned home, my wife greeted me with a knowing smile. She could tell I'd been wrestling with my emotions but also saw the subtle shift in my demeanor. I felt lighter, as though carrying this burden for so long had only bound me, and I wasn't convinced the past could ever truly be forgotten, but perhaps it could be transformed into something new. Over the next few weeks, I exchanged messages with my in-laws, cautiously engaging with their requests for advice, offering my insights into their ventures. They were eager to learn, humbled in ways only harsh reality can teach, and I found myself reveling in the irony that I, once the scorned, now played the role of mentor. As I watched them embrace their new roles, peacefulness enveloped me. Within the cracks of our past, budding companionship sought to emerge. But with every message and every encounter, I kept my heart grounded, vigilant against letting history repeat itself. Trust takes time to mend, and while the path forward is uncertain, I've realized that healing often requires both vulnerability and boundaries. I might have stepped into this journey tentatively, but each small interaction now feels like a step toward a brighter future. Am I the asshole for having almost severed ties? Perhaps. But sometimes, in the space where hurt and healing collide, understanding can create a bridge, one where I've started to rebuild, one cautious step at a time. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself in a peculiar state of reflection, teetering on a tightrope stretched between the past and the potential future. Each email from my in-laws pierced the silence of my routine, a mixture of trepidation and curiosity spiraling through me. I would sit at my desk, the golden afternoon light spilling through the window, casting patterns on the floor, and I would stare at their names on the screen as if they were foreign inscriptions from a long-gone civilization. It wasn't that I wanted to forget their past behavior, how they had scoffed at my ambitions and belittled my modest beginnings in favor of grounded expectations, but there was something persistently hopeful about their current tone. Their messages dripped with sincerity, laced with admissions of previous harshness, and I wondered if they, too, felt the weight of that pivotal moment when my little tech business surged into a thriving venture. It became evident that they weren't just reaching out with empty niceties, they were grappling with their own narratives, reconciling their feelings, and wondering if the family they had once deemed beneath them could now be considered a source of guidance. In one of those exchanged emails, they proposed a casual lunch, a neutral ground, a safe space for both sides to express and explore without the stifling attachment of unresolved tension. I found myself conflicted, tapping my fingers against the polished wood of my desk, picturing the cafe where we might meet. A quaint little spot with soft jazz playing in the background, birds chirping outside, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee wafting through the air. What if I walked in, and the very sight of them ignited a whirlwind of my old hurt? Or what if, in the midst of pleasantries, I found a surprising twist of warmth amidst our shared history? Ultimately, I decided to agree to the lunch. Perhaps it was the willingness to embrace both the potential for pain and healing that propelled me forward. As the date approached, I crafted a mental script, a blend of caution and openness, how I might articulate my feelings but blend them with understanding. The moment I stepped into that cafe, my heart raced with each breath, a symphony of uncertainty built within me. I saw them there, my in-laws, sitting at a sun-drenched table, visibly different from the sharp-edged figures of my memory. Their smiles were soft, framed by an unfamiliar tenderness that made it hard to reconcile with the past. The conversation began stilted, filled with careful pleasantries and awkward laughter until eventually, warmth began to seep in, easing the tension like the gentle coverage of a summer blanket. As we talked about benign topics, I felt an invisible barrier start to wane, replaced by a creeping sense of shared humanity. Their stories of struggles echoed my own, their dreams revealing shades of ambition that once felt hidden beneath their dismissive exterior. Something within me flickered, a burgeoning understanding fueled by empathy. I saw them not as the antagonists of my story but as individuals who, like me, were navigating their own trials in a rapidly shifting world. The discussion eventually shifted towards our businesses. I could feel them leaning closer, seeking not just my counsel but aiming to share in mutual growth. And as I offered insights, I realized that this was what healing looked like, not denial of the past but rather embracing it as part of the complex tapestry of relationships. It felt liberating, almost as if by extending my hand despite my previous reservations, I was affirming my worth not just as a son-in-law but as a person with insights worth sharing. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, a new rhythm began to form. We exchanged phone calls that seemed to ease into the comfort of familiarity, their laughter weaving through my days like the melody of a calming hymn. Their once utilitarian approach to me transformed into a blooming collaboration of ideas. There was an almost childlike enthusiasm in their exchanges, a realization that they could learn from me just as much as I could learn from them. It was a refreshing reversal of roles that dispelled the lingering shadows of resentment. Yet, I upheld my boundaries. I was watchful, guarding against the cynical whispers that danced in the corners of my mind, reminding me of the bitter words once spoken. It was a balance, one that required patience and discernment, but I knew that healing isn't merely a linear journey, it's more like a winding path through an intricate forest, where even the hard roots can display breathtaking blooms when nurtured patiently. Sometimes, I still find myself reflecting on whether my initial decision to put distance between us was right. Am I the asshole for having almost severed ties? The answer remains murky, cloaked in the complexities of human emotion and interaction. Yet, through this journey, I have come to embrace the ambivalence, allowing it to shape me rather than confine me. I realize that forgiveness is not an erase button but rather an ongoing negotiation of ourselves with those we share history with. And so, where once I felt fragmented, haunted by the past, I now sit in a quieter place, knowing that bridges can be rebuilt if we are willing to put in the effort, and that sometimes, it's in our grappling with hurt that we stumble upon unexpected beauty. Perhaps it's true, sometimes, the road doesn't lead back to where we began, but rather forward, towards something entirely new. I still remember the sound of my heart thumping in my chest, a primal rhythm interrupted only by the low hum of chatter from the family gathering. Christmas had always been a chaotic blend of laughter and light amidst the stress of looming responsibilities. But this year felt different, it felt heavy. My Uncle Harold was the center of attention, regaling everyone with elaborate tales of his upcoming surprise vacation to the Maldives for his daughter's Christmas gift, a trip that might as well have been a vacation of the gods. A sun-soaked getaway, oceans kissed by golden rays, while I sat a mere 10 feet away, feeling the tightening knot of resentment coiling in my stomach, the air thick with something bitter and unspoken. Just a few months back, he had borrowed $700 from me, promising to pay it back by summer, but summer had turned to fall and was now fading into winter, and here he was, talking about flopping on a beach while I was left holding the weight of unpaid debts and dwindling savings. The world outside the window streaked with winter sleet seemed a stark contrast to the sun-drenched life he was about to embark upon. I hadn't begrudged him his joy, but as he continued to expound on the grandeur of this vacation, my fingers involuntarily clenched around my glass, my knuckles turning white. I could feel the warmth of the room, the lights twinkling merrily above us, while my thoughts swirled with unease and doubt. Was I being unreasonable? Was it wrong to feel this way about family? They say money and family don't mix, and yet here I was, struggling to reconcile my love for my family with the hurt of when it felt like we were no longer on the same playing field. With every laugh and cheer from the gathered relatives, I felt the walls closing in around me, pressing on my chest until I could hardly breathe. I thought about his daughter, how this vacation would be something magical for her, a memory that would last a lifetime. But that didn't change the fact that I needed that money, too: bills, groceries, a pair of shoes that didn't have a hole worn through the sole. And then something snapped inside me, birthed from a mix of frustration and desperation. My voice broke the laughter like a sudden winter chill cutting through warm air, and I caught everyone's attention, all faces looking towards me. "Harold, can we talk about that loan?" The room fell quiet, the joyful energy draining from my words as the focus shifted from dreams of sun-soaked bliss to the heavy topic of debt. Harold looked taken aback, his expression shifting from jovial to defensive, his boastful demeanor deflating like an untied balloon. "What are you talking about?" he replied, the twinkle in his eye replaced by something darker. I could feel the weight of my words, like stones thrown into a placid lake, rippling out to the circles of family surrounding us. "The $700 you borrowed? I really need it back." There was an awkward silence, filled with muffled gasps and glances exchanged between family members, their expressions a mix of shock and, I could swear, a hint of contempt. I'd broken an unspoken convention, drawn back the curtain that shielded our family's fragile dynamics. Harold bristled, his pride wounded yet hidden behind a facade of casual irritation. "Come on, you know I'm good for it," he replied, the bravado slipping back into his tone. "This trip is for Sarah, don't make this about money now." But it was all about the money I had graciously lent him in confidence, thinking I'd be repaid before the year turned another page. I saw the embarrassment flicker in his eyes, fleeting yet sharp. I pressed on, my voice steadier than I felt inside. "I shouldn't have to feel guilty for needing what's already mine. I saved up for ages to lend it to you." The conversation dwindled into muffled complaints from Harold and whispers from the other relatives. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, unable to look away as the anger simmered beneath the surface. It felt excruciating yet liberating to have put it out there, a gaping wound laid bare that couldn't be sewn shut. In that moment, I realized the cost wasn't just material, it struck at the very heart of familial trust, turning us both into strangers fighting for something that had once been given freely. The evening wore on, and Harold eventually retreated from the conversation, a shadowy figure reclaiming the spotlight with half-hearted laughter. But I had crossed a threshold, and though the breadcrumbs of resentment might linger, I felt a strange lightness, an acknowledgement of my own needs amid the familial chaos. The unease didn't dissolve entirely, but I found peace in confronting the truth, and I experienced the beginnings of guilt dissipating, leaving space for clarity in its wake. A few days post-Christmas, I received a text from my uncle, a simple "Hey, let's get together, I'd like to clear the air." He'd agreed to pay me back in installments, starting with the first next week. I felt a rush of mixed emotions as I read the message. Relief washed over me, yes, but with it came a creeping wish that things didn't have to be difficult, ignited by the knowledge that confronting him had altered our relationship forever, shifting some foundational floorboards that would never return to their original status. I realized then, processing this new ground we stood upon, that sometimes, families could only rediscover themselves through honesty, grimy and raw as it may feel, but worth the discomfort for the sake of healing. As the weeks progressed, I found myself caught in a curious limbo. Each time my phone pinged with a message, my heart fluttered with a mix of anticipation and anxiety, anticipation for a glimpse of the man I'd once called my uncle and anxiety about what each check-in would herald. His first payment arrived promptly the following Friday. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope that bore my name, the familiar handwriting inside. It felt strange, like crossing forbidden ground, as if opening that envelope would further peel away the layers of our relationship, revealing the raw truth beneath. The moment I pulled out the check, a wave of relief surged through me, quickly followed by an echoing reminder of his promises. The feeling was bittersweet. I was grateful for the money, of course, but I couldn't shake the heaviness in my heart. That Sunday, family dinner rolled around, and with it came a palpable tension gnawing at the corners of my mind. We gathered in my parents' living room, the air thick with the scent of my mom's famous roast. Laughter bubbled up around the room as my relatives exchanged jovial stories, their raucousness contrasting sharply with my internal struggle. I could see my uncle from across the room, dapper in a sharp suit that made him look 10 years younger than his age. He was animatedly sharing plans for the trip to the Maldives, his daughter perched atop the arm of the couch, her excitement radiating. She beamed with pride, blissfully unaware of the cautious glances exchanged between her older cousins and me. Each vivid detail he described felt like a dagger to my gut. The sun-drenched beaches, the luxurious villa, the words dripped with privilege while the reality of his debt loomed heavy behind them. I swallowed hard, recalling our conversation from a few weeks back, the discomfort we'd navigated, and the truth I had dared to share. Eventually, I caught my uncle's eye. His expression shifted instantly. Gone was the carefree demeanor he wore when speaking of the Maldives. Instead, it was replaced with something akin to shame, or perhaps just a flicker of guilt. I hesitated, wondering if I should follow through with this newfound understanding between us, or allow silence to wrap around us like a thick fog. But as the evening wore on, the bravado in his words became harder to listen to. The laughter felt hollow. I clenched my jaw, trying to focus on a game of charades unfolding nearby, but inside, I was seething, a simmering pot about to boil over. Then, as if on cue, the family buzzed around, exchanging placid nods, all oblivious to the storm swirling in my mind. I stood up abruptly, meeting him halfway across the room, and as I did, time felt suspended. I couldn't fully articulate what drove me to speak, but the warmth of his laughter abruptly halted as I reached him. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice barely above the restaurant chatter that reverberated around us. His face paled slightly as he glanced over at my parents, then nodded stiffly. We stepped into the adjacent kitchen, the cacophony of family momentarily muffled behind the door. "About the Maldives," I started, carefully measuring my words, "it's just..." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to be honest. "I don't understand how you can afford that when you owe me $700. There was a pregnant pause, and I could feel the air thickening between us. His eyes flickered with indignation before his shoulders slumped, exhaustion crumpling his facade. "You're right," he breathed, running a hand through his hair. The honesty in his tone caught me by surprise, a raw admission that echoed back through the familial halls we wandered. In that space, I sensed the weight of secrecy being lifted, if only slightly. As we stood there, the conversation slowly unwound, the debts, the choices he'd made, the regrets he wished he could reclaim. I saw him, not as my uncle who flaunted his apparent wealth, but as a flawed man grappling with his own decisions, navigating the murky waters of his life just as I was navigating mine. Both of us had been on different paths, yet somehow, we arrived at the same crossroads. It was hauntingly familiar. When we exited the kitchen, I felt lighter, as if the dark clouds surrounding us had drifted apart even just a little. In the weeks that followed, my uncle resumed his payments, each one a silent promise that allowed us to rebuild an invisible bridge that spanned the chasm between us. Conversations became more open, and laughter wasn't forced anymore. It returned, gradually, restoring warmth to our gatherings. Eventually, he began to involve me in his plans, allowing me to express my dreams of traveling, not to the Maldives, but to places I yearned to see, and I recognized the transformation. I understood deeply now that confronting the hard truths had not obliterated our relationship, rather, it had reformed its very foundation. As Christmas approached, I found myself wondering more and more about the nature of family, the enduring bonds that tied us to one another, for better and for worse. Something closer to understanding blossomed. Perhaps, in our raw exchanges, we were somehow rediscovering the essence of connection, imperfect yet precious. Then, one cold winter evening, as snow blanketed the streets outside and the warmth of the season settled in our home, I received another tantalizing message from him, one that read simply, "Let's plan a family trip together next year, somewhere we can all go." It felt like an invitation to venture forth into unknown territory, and to that, I found myself wholeheartedly saying yes, feeling the comfort of adventure awaiting us, perhaps captured in the warmth of honesty instead of the weight of pretense. As I read his message, a rush of excitement coursed through me, merging with the ghosts of my earlier uncertainty. The thought of a family trip was exhilarating, like the first breath of fresh air after being inside on a stuffy day. I imagined us laughing together, making new memories, and perhaps even healing some of the rifts that had widened in our conversations. I envisioned sandy beaches and lush landscapes, places where we could leave behind the heaviness of family dynamics and indulge in pure joy, if only for a while. Nestled in the corner of my living room, with the faint smell of pine wafting from our modest Christmas tree, I couldn't suppress a smile. My heart swelled at the thought of reconciliation, of letting go of past grievances and embracing what lay ahead. In the following days leading up to the holidays, our conversations took on a newfound lightness. He opened up about his life in ways I hadn't expected, his struggles at work and the weight of being the family's financial provider. It felt surreal, sharing laughter about his daughter's seemingly endless wish list while in his shadow lay the burden of the previous debts and disappointments we had navigated. I caught myself thinking about how daunting the prospect of taking my family on a shared journey had once seemed, overshadowed by prior confrontations. Yet, here we were, mapping out a future that sparkled with possibilities. As we began planning the trip, each message exchanged felt like stitches weaving the fabric of our connection tighter. We explored myriad destinations, from tropical paradises to mountain retreats. My uncle's daughter chimed in with her ideas, and so too did my siblings, each contributing their wishes and hopes for this journey. There was something wonderfully liberating about immersing ourselves in a collective dream, a shared experience that bound us together through laughter and imagination rather than the weight of expectation or disappointment. The past, with all its burdens, faded into the background for those fleeting moments, and the prospect of adventure glimmered ahead like glistening snow under the winter sun. However, as the planning intensified, I found myself grappling with another wave of emotions. The shadow of my uncle's debt lingered in the back of my mind, creeping in like a winter chill despite the warmth of our newfound camaraderie. Would I be able to fully embrace this trip, carefree and lighthearted, knowing he still owed me? A part of me wanted to push the thought aside, to submerge the nagging feeling in a tidal wave of optimism, while another urged me to confront this lingering discomfort. I reasoned with myself that perhaps this is what forgiveness looked like, the conscious choice to move forward despite unresolved tensions, to embrace joy while still holding space for the healing that needed to occur. The weeks rolled on, and soon enough, the trip was finalized. We had settled on a tropical island with golden beaches and azure waters. As Christmas approached, I felt more connected with my family than I had in years, every message imbued with the fragility and strength of our shared journey. But the night before our departure, while bustling to pack, an unexpected reminder hit me when I stumbled across a handwritten note my uncle had sent long ago, the one where he'd promised to repay the debt. It was a small piece of paper with irregular handwriting, like a phantom drifting through my memories, a promise made during a time when things felt lighter, when the looming shadow of financial stress hadn't yet clouded our interactions. In that moment, all my emotional progress felt attacked. Conflicted by the weight of my own conscience, I decided to send him a simple text, an olive branch submerged in vulnerability. I'm genuinely excited for the trip, but I can't shake the feeling about the debt. He replied instantly, let's discuss it when we're away. I want to enjoy this break with you. Deep down, I appreciated his resolve to prioritize positivity over doubt, yet the flicker of unease within me charged the air like static electricity. As we arrived at the island, every moment was filled with laughter and light, the seashells sharp against our footprints in the sand. My uncle appeared to be genuinely enjoying precious time with his daughter, capturing memories in photographs that would surely warm our hearts in years to come, while I felt the shift within myself, an acceptance of the messiness of family. Yet, the acknowledgement of debts unresolved lingered, almost like a character in its own right, standing just outside the joyous frame of our vacation. I realized then how complicated it is to straddle the line between past pain and present joy, between memories that bind us and those that wound us. On the last evening of our trip, as the sun sank beneath the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and lavender, I knew I had to confront my uncle once more, my heart heavy but resolution firm. We strolled along the beach, the waves caressing our ankles, making the moment feel surreal. As the sky faded to twilight, I turned to him, prepared for the delicate balance of honesty and hope I had carried from home. It's been an incredible trip, but we need to talk about some things when we return, I began, about the debt. I want us both to feel free moving forward. He looked at me, eyes reflecting the fading sun, and sighed warmly as he nodded, granting me a sense of relief as the uncertain weight began to lift. Reflecting on it, I realized there might never be a perfect time to confront issues that cling to family dynamics like sea salt in air, and while the elements of debt still hung, our shared joy illuminated so much more. In vulnerability lies freedom. Sometimes, that's where the trips of a lifetime begin. No, sleep, all my childhood bedrooms had something in common. Only now that I live alone did I realize what that was. The first time I noticed the peculiar pattern was when I stood in the center of my new apartment, a modest one-bedroom tucked snugly into the heart of the city. It was a place of my own, yet it felt eerily familiar. The walls were painted soft beige, the floor a warm wood, and the gentle hum of the city outside filled the air like a nighttime lullaby. But as I unpacked boxes and hung up my belongings, it struck me, every bedroom I had ever occupied as a child had a specific element that seemed to echo through the years. Each space had a window that faced the exact same direction, southeast. I remember as a kid, lying in bed and staring out at the clouds shifting colors as the sun set, thinking that the universe was painting portraits just for me. However, something darker lurked behind those windows, a feeling that so many moments of joy were teetering on the edge of something menacing. My parents divorced when I was 10, and I began to wonder if perhaps it wasn't just a coincidence. As my mind wandered down those troubled lanes of memory, images flashed through my mind, that old, decrepit house we lived in after the split. The peeling wallpaper, the creaky floorboards, and especially the shadows that danced in the corners whenever the sun dipped low. I could almost hear the whispers in the dark. They became companions during sleepless nights, always promising to help me, while making it clear that their comfort came at a price. With each move to a new bedroom, the shadows seemed to follow me, lurking closer each time. At first, I thought them just figments of my imagination, remnants of childhood fears stemming from my fragmented family life. Now, in my own space at 30, the memory was no longer vague. As I stood by that southeast window, I could feel a chill creeping along my spine, as if I were being beckoned back into the heart of those tales I had tried so desperately to forget. I dismissed it as mere nostalgia, but then came the whisper, just faint enough to trick my mind into believing it was just the wind rustling the trees. "Come play," it said, a sweet lilt that was both inviting and gut-wrenching. My hands trembled as I decided to leave my safe haven for the evening air, hoping some fresh air would ground me. Just outside, the world was alive, families, couples, friends all bridged by laughter as they mingled in the twilight. But even in a crowd, I felt wrapped in a blanket of loneliness. After a few minutes of walking, I turned and headed back to my apartment, to gather my thoughts and clear my head. The whole way home, I noticed those same wild shadows clawing at the edges of my vision, just as they had in my youth, edging closer with every step. Upon entering my small space, the silence suffocated me, every creak of the floorboards echoing in a way that made me feel less alone yet completely abandoned. I walked over to the window, the familiarity wrapping itself around me like an old coat, and realized that I was still that lonely child, trying to make sense of the world while seeking solace in forgotten corners. In an impulsive act, I decided to pull the curtain wide open, letting the moonlight spill into the room. To my shock, my heart raced at a sudden movement outside. The shadows, once whispers in the corners, pooled just beneath the window in unearthly shapes, tantalizing me with nostalgia and secrets I had long ignored. My pulse quickened, and I thought of all the times I had ignored the signs throughout my life, closing the doors on thoughts that summoned dread but also hinted at discovery. In that moment, I felt at the precipice of something monumental, a challenge to confront my past rather than flee from it. But instead of fear, I felt liberating curiosity, inviting those mysteries back into my heart. I placed a hand over the glass, feeling that odd mix of warmth and chill as I whispered softly, "What do you want from me?" The response was a gentle swell, the shadows dancing closer as if inviting me to join them. Here I was, finally ready to embrace all that I had avoided for years. About a week later, as I still sat enveloped by those night whispers, I caught a glimpse of a memory, a dream I used to have of running through an endless field, with children playing and laughing without a care. Those memories shifted like sand in an hourglass, forming new shapes in my mind. I began writing them down, detailing everything, every whisper I heard, every touch I felt in the corners of my rooms, and eventually, the truth emerged. Those shadows, which had once loomed over me as dark memories, were reminders of a childhood filled with magic. I had hidden from my feelings for far too long, but now, I was ready to turn every belief I held about my past upside down. That playful call to come play wasn't about fear, it was about reconnecting with that part of me I had buried under the weight of adult responsibilities and heartache. The closer the shadows danced, the more I saw them as potential and promise rather than threats. And like any good story, the shadows remained ever present, threading the past with my future, allowing me to weave together a narrative that made sense at last. That revelation breathed new life into my heart as I embraced the space I called home, a sanctuary full of the joys I had once known. Yet, as I finally snuffed out the light late one night, I felt a stir of energy, a soft rustling brushed against my skin. Just by following the path back to the shadows of my childhood, I discovered that they weren't gone, they were always there, waiting for me to acknowledge them, ready to share those deep, sweet secrets once again. It turns out, every childhood bedroom could be sanctified in a way if we dared to listen to the stories echoed within them. Update: I've since taken up writing again, turning my childhood tales into stories I share online. The response has been overwhelming. It seems I wasn't the only one who carried these shadows, but I've come to realize that my words breathe life into them. A small community has formed around my confessions, each of us unraveling our own histories and discovering shared experiences in those whispered moments of fear and joy. What I once thought was a burden has now become a gift, a testament to the power of storytelling and the bonds it can forge between those who dare to listen. As I sat in my dimly lit room, the soft hum of my computer the only companion aside from the shadows that danced joyfully along the walls, I began to sift through the memories that had shaped my childhood, memories that were now spilling onto the screen like ink from a well-used pen. With each tap of the keyboard, I felt a comforting release, a connection to those childhood bedrooms that had been more than just spaces where I slept. They were vessels holding pieces of my spirit, echoing with laughter, tears, secrets, and fears. In each one, there was something eerily familiar, a strange presence that, until recently, I hadn't fully acknowledged. My first room in the house on Maple Street had been the brightest, painted a cheerful yellow that caught the morning light just right, but underneath that sunny veneer, I had felt eyes watching me, always lurking in the corners where shadows mingled with stuffed animals and forgotten toys. Then, there was the small bedroom in the apartment my family moved to when I was 8, where in the middle of the night I would hear whispers from the closet, like a conversation between old friends, secrets shared only in the dark. I thought I had simply been imaginative, that I was a child prone to flights of fancy. But as I delved deeper into my past through the stories I shared online, my fellow storytellers confessed similar experiences, echoes of their own childhoods that mirrored mine, all rooted in similar anxieties and lonely nights. It began to dawn on me that perhaps what I perceived as specters of my past were, in fact, manifestations of the fears and growing pains all children experience but often bury as they transition into adulthood. Slowly, this realization morphed into a kind of solidarity among us, a shared space where we could explore our fears without judgment, where vulnerability became our strength. Each story prompted reflections on what those rooms meant to us, not just as childhood havens, but as the first steps into understanding ourselves. I vividly remember one night, typing away late into the serenity of solitude, when a particular message popped up on my screen. It was from a fellow storyteller I had come to admire, someone who wrote with a raw honesty that resonated with me. They spoke of the first time they had seen their own shadow reflecting back at them, a friend who, at first glance, felt like an intruder in their own world. Those words struck a chord. It was as if they had pulled from my own diary. We engaged in a conversation that stretched into the early hours, exploring our connections to those rooms, and the peculiar comfort we derived from the understanding that we were never truly alone, even in our darkest moments. This exchange ignited a spark, pushing me to dig even deeper into my psyche. I began to write not only about fear but also about joy, about the afternoons spent building blanket forts, the discovered wonders of an old book collection, and crayon-scribbled maps of imaginary worlds. I painted my childhood in colors more vibrant than the dismal shadows I had clung to for so long. These explorations led to unexpected revelations, and I started to realize my last bedroom before leaving for college was surrounded by a spectrum of feelings, excitement for the future mixed with anxiety for the unknown. The presence I felt there was different, a comforting whisper reminding me that it was okay to stand on the brink of adulthood and still carry the echoes of childhood behind me. When my stories turned into a kind of catharsis, I knew I had stepped past the threshold of nostalgia and into the realm of acceptance. Writing transformed into an affirmation of who I was and who I was becoming, a journey shared with others facing their own darkness and light. As I closed my laptop one night, I felt a gentle weight lift from my chest, a knowing that those rooms, those intangible specters that had haunted my thoughts for years, were simply parts of my story, pieces of a puzzle that I had now started to reshape. Each echo was no longer a reminder of fear but a testament to my resilience and growth. I felt empowered, not just for myself, but for others who found solace in our shared experiences. It was in this space, I realized, that the shadows didn't just watch, they listened, and with every word we shared, we grew a little lighter, a little braver, and a little more human. I wouldn't trade this journey for anything, and perhaps what I had once feared was not about what watched me, but about what I could accomplish when I allowed my story to take flight, merging memory with creativity, and uncovering the beauty that lived beneath the surface. And as the world outside grew darker, I felt a comforting glow radiating from within, reminding me that perhaps, in every bedroom, past, present, and future, there lives a piece of me, a part of my journey that is always worth sharing. With each tale I wove, I found myself diving deeper into the shadows of my past, peeling back layers I had long buried under a facade of normalcy and routine. I reminisced about the tiny rooms that housed my childhood dreams, the way the yellow wallpaper in my first bedroom seemed to sigh in relief whenever I would tell stories to the pastel stuffed animals that adorned my bed. I would drape my childhood fears over those walls, and in return, they whispered back with every creak of the floorboards and soft rustle of the curtains. As I would often confide in those inanimate listeners, I gradually realized that these stories were as much for them as they were for me, a way to channel my feelings into something tangible. Yet, as an adult, I often felt cut off from that magical space where imagination thrived, especially when overwhelmed by life's relentless grind. But now, in sharing my words online, it felt as though I was invited back into that sacred place, offering not just a glimpse of my heart but an open window for others to peer through and find a reflection of their own experiences. Each post sparked a flurry of comments, confessions from strangers who echoed my childhood fears, narrating their own encounters with flickering shadows and lingering feelings that refused to be silenced. Sometimes they were lighthearted, and sometimes they struck chords that reverberated deep within, each interaction nurturing a community that felt like magic, a comfort I'd long sought. One night, as I sat under the soft light of my desk lamp, tapping away with eager fingers, I came across someone who stood out among the rest, someone named Eli. Eli shared that he lived alone in a small studio apartment, much like mine, and like me, had begun to feel haunted by the echoes of his childhood bedrooms. He spoke of how he had a relentless cycle of dreams, the same dream where he was a child again, lost in his old house, searching for something he could never grasp. His dreams always left him feeling hollow in the morning, soaked in a longing he couldn't articulate. I felt an immediate bond with him, his vulnerability resonated with my own hidden struggles. Without hesitation, I replied, fumbling for the right words to let him know he wasn't alone in this surreal experience. The conversation blossomed, with late-night exchanges that turned into shared late-night writing sessions. We grew closer, our narratives intertwining like vines climbing a forgotten wall, feeding each other's flames of creativity while pulling back the curtain of despair together. But it was one Saturday, while we were video chatting, that Eli revealed something that would change everything. With a trembling voice, he asked if I had ever felt a palpable presence in my childhood homes, something that felt as alive as the stories we shared. I paused, recalling late nights spent laying wide-eyed under the covers, where I felt I was not truly alone, a comforting presence lying just beyond the threshold between sleep and waking. A shiver cascaded through me as I said, yes, watching the flicker of recognition spark in his eyes. He confessed that his dreams often felt less like nightmares and more like invitations, urging him to return to the house he grew up in, a space laden with secrets and whispers. We shared stories of our childhood rooms, Eli's walls plastered with the praises of his ever-watchful parents, mine holding the scars of the imaginary beasts that lurked just out of sight. That night, a thought lingered in the back of my mind, and it took root. The more we talked, I had considered visiting my childhood home, hoping to illuminate the dark corners, not just to confront what lay concealed there, but to embrace the memories I had long deemed burdensome. As I floated the idea to Eli, I was surprised by how fervently he urged me to do so. What if, he said, there's something there waiting for you? Something that could provide answers? After a long drive filled with uncertainty, I arrived beneath the familiar roof that once enveloped my childhood with love and dread. Darkness had settled into the night, casting a thick, oppressive air over the house. Each creak of the wooden floor was a reminder of the secrets it had held for decades. I walked into my old room, small, anachronistic, but powerful in its ability to resonate with the echoes of old laughter and sadness. I spoke aloud, recalling memories with the fervor of someone yearning for connection, thanking the walls for housing my dreams and fears. It was then that I felt a warmth, a flicker in the air, and as I closed my eyes, images flooded my thoughts, moments stitched together in a vibrant tapestry of joy, and a few dark threads of shadowed apprehension. But what struck me most was not the fear, but rather the love I felt for that sacred space, and for every version of myself that had passed through it. I closed my eyes, embracing the poignant tranquility that blanketed the room, and allowed myself to remember the promise I made long ago. I would not let fear constrict my voice. When I opened my eyes again, tears brimming with both sorrow and gratitude flowed down my cheeks. Standing there, I understood that in confronting my past, each bedroom and each story, I had reclaimed my narrative. As I returned to my apartment, fortified by this experience, I sensed the presence of something greater, a palpable connection not just to my own story, but to Eli and our blossoming community, a space where we all chose to share the dreams, fears, and beauty of our pasts. And as I sat to write that night, the glow from my desk lamp a soothing reminder of the warmth we all craved, I knew that every story shared only expanded the reach of our collective imagination. My past wouldn't confine me, it would nourish my creative spirit, urging me to dance with shadows and find the light, to remind all who listened that together we could illuminate the darkness, painting a bridge from our childhoods to the present, a bridge wrapped in the threads of storytelling, making us a little lighter, a little braver, and forever connected. My father's birthday dinner was supposed to be a joyous occasion, a celebration filled with laughter and shared memories, but as I sat there, the weight of unresolved grief rested heavily on my chest. It's funny how the three of us, my dad, my sister Sarah, and I, had always formed a tight-knit unit, yet recent events had begun to fracture that bond. Just 6 months had passed since I suffered a miscarriage, a time when my world turned gray, where joy felt like a distant memory, and the unwavering support I had hoped for from my family seemed, at best, insufficient. I had spent weeks preparing myself for this dinner, eager to distract my mind and feel a sense of normalcy again, but a knot began to twist in my stomach as soon as we arrived at the quaint little restaurant my dad loved. The walls were decorated with photographs from his past birthdays, capturing moments of bliss that now felt unbearably distant. As our waiter brought over the first round of drinks, I inhaled deeply, trying to soak in the laughter of others at nearby tables, the clinking of glasses ringing like a soft melody in my ears. My dad, with his warm eyes twinkling, regaled us with stories from his youth, tales of cross-country road trips and shenanigans with friends. I smiled and took sips of my wine, cherishing the moments of levity he brought, yet shadows loomed in my heart, blossoming with each passing minute. That's when I heard it, a quiet voice carrying through the room, sharp enough to slice through the cheerful hum of conversation. Sarah, seated just across from me, casually remarked to her partner, "Well, at least Mom didn't have to deal with a tiny grave this year." The words dropped heavily into the air, and for a moment, the world around me faded. My heart raced, and my fingers gripped the edge of the table as dread washed over me like bitter cold water. How could she say something so callous? The hurt of my loss bubbled up, intertwining with a complex blend of anger and disbelief. I had always considered Sarah my closest confidant, but now she felt like a stranger, one who didn't comprehend the weight of what I had been through or the sensitivity required when discussing grief. It took all my strength to maintain a facade of composure, but each shallow breath hinted at the storm brewing within me. The entire dinner suddenly felt unbearable, my father's laughter ringing hollow as myriad thoughts cascaded through my mind. I felt the familiar urge to flee, to escape the suffocating reality of my sister's insensitivity. Finally, unable to bear it any longer and desperate to shield myself from any further emotional assault, I stood up, excusing myself with a shaky voice. My dad's laughter dimmed, and an uneasy silence crept in as he looked up, confusion clouding his features. I hurried toward the restroom, each step feeling like an avalanche of regret crashing down on me, for leaving, for how my sister could be so ignorant of my pain, for what was supposed to be a celebration of my father's life morphing into a spotlight on my loss. Once inside the small, dimly lit restroom, I stared at my reflection in the mirror, trying to decipher the woman looking back. Anger flared like wildfire, and I told myself I was justified to feel this way. I reached for my phone, contemplating sending a message to my sister, maybe to explain how her comment had tangled my heart in knots. But each time I typed a word, it felt inadequate, like I was fumbling to convey a deep sadness that she may never understand. I left the restaurant, heart aching and burdened, and as I sat alone in my car, the muffled sounds of the joyful gathering faded into the night. I ruminated over my sister's words, wondering if I had truly overreacted. I drove home in silence, clutching the steering wheel tight, the road ahead blurring through tears I tried to keep at bay. It wasn't until I got home that I found a sliver of calmness, the weight of the day beginning to lift, and I reflected on the necessity of self-care amidst the chaos. Maybe my response to Sarah was not just about her comment, it was my silent plea for recognition of my pain, a desperate call for empathy that I longed for, yet struggled to express. Weeks passed, and I hesitated, swirling in miscommunication and confusion. Then one quiet afternoon, I finally decided to reach out to Sarah. I texted her, opening the doors for a conversation that would lead us into fragile territory. To my surprise, she responded almost immediately, expressing her own vulnerability. Sarah confessed she had been scared to address my loss, unsure of how to support me, fearing she would say the wrong thing. In turn, I explained how her thoughtless comment had sent me spiraling, how grief could feel isolating, especially in the walls built between family. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Instead, it transformed into a delicate stitch, communication slowly weaving our hearts back together. We realized we had been struggling at opposite ends of the same spectrum, needing each other without knowing how to reach out. As for our father's birthday, I returned to our family dinners, hesitant yet hopeful, ready to make new memories, learning the ebb and flow of grief and joy intertwined. It wouldn't always be easy, but perhaps through understanding, even those heavy ties could strengthen our bond. A few months later, we even planned a gathering to honor my lost baby, a gentle way for us all to acknowledge the fragility of life together. It wasn't just about acknowledging my hurt anymore, it became a shared experience that drew us closer, nurturing the bond we once thought lost. This whole experience taught me a powerful lesson about the intricacies of grief. We can be both hurt and hurting without meaning to, and sometimes the simplest misstep can lead to the most profound realizations. In the end, we came to understand that healing is a journey best walked together, even when the path may be a bit rocky. As the weeks rolled on, my family and I began to reshape the focus of our gatherings, infusing them with stories about the loved ones we had lost and celebrating the lives we still had. Each meeting became a chapter in our collective healing, and slowly, we found joy in shared laughter and nostalgic recollections, all while allowing room for tears when they surfaced. It felt surreal at times, navigating the delicate balance between joy and sorrow. My sister would often reminisce about growing up, cracking jokes about our childhood antics, and I would join in, laughing until I forgot about the heavy ache nestled within my heart. Yet, with every joke, I was acutely aware of an underlying tension that lingered. Our grief was raw, and though we had found a semblance of healing, there were still unspoken words tethered to our experiences. One evening, after what had been a particularly lovely dinner filled with good food and laughter, I noticed my sister staring out the window, her brow furrowed in a way that suggested a silent battle was happening inside her. It was a moment of connection lost in translation, and somehow I knew that she was wrestling with her own guilt, her own questions about our shared experience of loss. Taking a deep breath, I asked her what was on her mind, and she hesitated before her voice came out as merely a whisper. "I can't believe how different life feels now. Do you think we'll ever get back to normal?" As she looked at me, vulnerability flickering in her eyes, I recognized the fear she held, fear that our family would remain fractured, struggling beneath the weight of absence. I reached for her hand, A simple gesture meant to convey solidarity, signaling that the pathway to normal was no longer our goal. Together, we were redefining what our family meant. In the days that followed, we made it a point to engage in small but meaningful rituals. We repurposed anniversaries of our losses into days of gratitude, where we would sit together, perhaps with a candle lit or a favorite photo framed between us, and recount stories of our loved ones, mirthful tales mixed with those easier to swallow that were steeped in love. My sister opened up more, sharing her own struggles with guilt and regret, angles of grief I hadn't seen before. Each conversation gradually eroded the walls we had built around our hearts. We remembered not just those who had left us but also acknowledged our shared humanity and the heavy burden it bore. Healing often felt like 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but each shared moment brought us closer to the heart of what it meant to be family. My father, who had been notably quiet after my loss, appeared to appreciate this newfound dynamic, often chiming in with his own stories that nurtured the laughter in our home once again. He became a stalwart foundation beneath our feet, always encouraging us to lean on him when the weight of our sorrow became too heavy to bear alone. I learned that he, too, was navigating his grief in his own way, the quiet moments of reflection weaving together a narrative of strength and vulnerability that inspired me to keep pushing forward. As spring began to emerge with its floral blooms, glimmers of hope sparkled amidst our healing. I had always held the belief that moments of shared vulnerability could bind us closer together, and my experience had only reinforced that notion. The rocky path I had trekked with my sister transformed into vibrant hues of compassion. However, it wasn't until one particular afternoon, while we were sipping coffee on the porch, that I felt we had truly turned a corner. "You know," my sister said, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of her cup, "I think about the baby often. I still grieve, but it feels different now. It's more about remembering than just sadness." Those words settled around us like a gentle breeze, palpable yet comforting as we both acknowledged the bittersweet nature of our memories. By this point, I realized healing wasn't a linear path but rather an intricate tapestry of emotions, perspectives, and connections. As the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, casting hues of gold across the landscape, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for where we were. This persistent journey teased out the best of us, the lessons learned, the love rekindled, and bonds fortified through shared experiences of grief and love. Looking back now, I understand that acknowledging our individual and collective hurt was just the beginning. It was essential to honor those we lost, yet it was equally pivotal to foster life in our own hearts while doing so. As I reflect on my journey, I find comfort in knowing that while the scars may never completely fade, they have transformed into marks of love, reminders of life's fragility that allowed us to grow as individuals and as a family. Healing becomes a narrative constantly rewritten, just as our love continues to bloom, bright and enduring, a cycle of remembrance and connection that honors not just the lost but also those still here, cherishing every moment we share together. Update: a few months later, when the fall leaves began to blanket the ground, my sister and I found ourselves volunteering at a local charity that supported families who had experienced loss. We thought perhaps we could bring some comfort to others navigating similar paths, and in doing so, strengthened our bond even further. Each story shared was a reminder of our resilience, proving that together, we were not only bereaved but beautifully alive, creating new pages for the chapters that lay ahead. The crisp air of autumn wrapped around us like a soft blanket as I walked alongside my sister, Emma, through the bustling community center. The scent of cinnamon and nutmeg wafted from the nearby kitchen, where volunteers were preparing a feast for the families we hoped to support. I looked at Emma, her hair dancing in the light breeze, and felt a warmth blossom in my heart. It was hard to believe how much had changed since that fateful birthday dinner, where everything had unraveled in a flash of pain and misunderstanding. The air felt lighter now, like the weight of grief had transformed into something we could carry together. Volunteering became a sacred ritual for us, not just a service to others, but a space for our own healing. Each week, we would share stories with those who understood our journey, laughing, crying, and sometimes sitting in contemplative silence. It was in these moments, surrounded by people clinging to hope amidst their sorrow, that we found clarity in our suffering. One evening, after we had helped set up the space for a support group meeting, Emma turned to me with that familiar, mischievous glint in her eye. She suggested we create a special gratitude wall, a place where we could post notes of appreciation for the little things in life, like the laughter shared over coffee, or the warmth of a hug on a cold day. I loved this idea. It felt like we were taking our grief and turning it into something beautiful, offering it to others as a light guiding them through their darkest moments. Days turned into weeks, and soon we were consumed by an unexpected project, a charity event that would not only raise funds but also spread awareness about the often taboo subject of baby loss. Emma and I brainstormed passionately over cups of tea, envisioning a candlelight vigil to honor those we had lost and to celebrate the lives still being lived. I felt a flutter of excitement. It was empowering to take control of our sorrow, to transform it into a platform that could help others. I reached out to potential speakers, healing coaches, and even local artists who had experienced similar losses, inviting them to share their stories and talents. Our community embraced the idea, gathering behind us, and soon what was once a simple concept blossomed into an event that rippled throughout the town. The day of the vigil arrived, and as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, I stood at the forefront of a small group, my heart racing with anticipation. Emma squeezed my hand and smiled, a reassuring gesture that brought me comfort. I spoke openly about our journey, about how we had walked through fire only to emerge stronger, and it felt cathartic to release our story into the world. As candles flickered to life, their gentle flames reflecting in the eyes of those gathered, I felt a profound sense of connection, no longer alone in my sorrow, but part of something much greater. Each shared remembrance, each tear, and each smile became a thread weaving us together, reminding me that grief, while isolating, could also create a community of love and understanding. After the event, as we cleaned up and started to close the space for the night, Emma surprised me with a warm hug. "I didn't think we could turn our sadness into something so beautiful," she said, a hint of disbelief in her voice. "But look at what we did." I nodded, overwhelmed with emotion. The evening had been a testament to resilience, not just ours but of everyone who had braved their own storms. Just when I thought I couldn't feel more connected to Emma, I realized the shared labor of love had sewn us closer, and the fragile harmony we had nurtured gave me hope with deep, unwavering roots. As the days faded into the past, I sometimes found myself reflecting quietly in my room, on the journey that had led me to this moment. It was strange how the air around us seemed to shimmer now, imbued with a sense of possibility and healing. I understood now that while the loss would always be a part of me, it no longer defined my narrative. Instead, it underscored my resilience and illuminated the importance of love and community. Update: a few months later, as winter cloaked the world in white, I received a letter from one of the families we had helped through the charity event. The mother expressed gratitude so heartfelt it felt as though she had reached into my chest to tug at my heartstrings. She informed me that they named their newborn daughter after the baby I had lost. Somehow, those words wove through my grief and into a new, hopeful chapter. I realized that I, too, was creating life anew, forging connections that honored the past while celebrating the present. It brought me comfort to know that even amid loss, love was still growing, binding us all in a beautiful tapestry of remembrance and hope. And so, as the world outside darkened early, I wrapped myself in a blanket of warmth and possibility, letting sleep find me with a heart full of love, knowing that together with Emma, we were brightening the path for others, and ourselves, in this ever-evolving journey of life. It's funny how a seemingly small, mundane moment can spiral into something significant in your life. I never thought tossing out a pillow would lead me to question the very fabric of my marriage. My name is Ethan, and I've been happily married to my wife, Lily, for nearly 6 years. We have those comfortable, cozy routines, the shared cups of coffee on a Sunday morning, evening walks after dinner, and the predictable rhythm of our lives together. But lately, there was something about our shared space that had begun to grate on my nerves, particularly one fluffy, lavender-colored pillow that we kept on our bed, a gift from her grandmother. I should probably mention that it was one of those pillows that carried a constant, overwhelming scent of lavender, almost sickening at times, masking the sense of my own comforting cologne that lingered in the air. At first, it was just a quirky part of our home, but over the months, its presence turned from soothing to suffocating, especially as we prepared for a week-long family stay. I could feel my irritation bubbling beneath the surface whenever I caught sight of it. It was always there, like a persistent itch I couldn't scratch. The night before her family was set to arrive, I found myself tossing and turning, the pillow's scent invading my dreams, wrapping me like a shroud. At 2 a.m, exhausted and desperate, I finally snapped. I can still vividly recall the sensation of the pillow softening in my grip as I carried it down the hallway, heart racing, my mind flooded with conflicting emotions. I felt both reckless and relieved as I swung open the door to the storage room, a small space filled with boxes and old mementos, and pitched the pillow in. It sank into the darkness like a weight off my shoulders, and I felt a jolt of sick satisfaction. I spent the next few hours in a haze of guilt and triumph, thinking about everything else I could say about our relationship, but instead, her family arrived the next morning, and Lily hadn't even noticed her pillow was gone in the chaos of greeting them. But here's where things get tricky. As the day went on, I could see the tiniest hints of concern flickering in her expression. She searched our bedroom, rifling through drawers and shrugging off the chatter of her family, who were blissfully unaware of the mounting tension. I felt that gnawing sense of unease, the kind that creeps into the bathroom mirror when you stand alone, staring at your reflection, questioning your most recent choices. When she finally confronted me, not long after dinner, her eyes were wide, searching for reassurance in my expression. "Have you seen my lavender pillow?" The question, innocent yet loaded, hung in the air between us. I hesitated but ultimately confessed, feeling the flush of shame creeping up my neck. Her silence was deafening, the confusion morphing into something sharper. Instead of comfort, I had thrown away a part of her history, a small piece of her family. And I could see the quiet devastation etched in the lines of her face. Our subsequent conversation was heavy with emotion. I could sense the spiral of hurt in her voice, revealing how that pillow had connected her to memories of her childhood, evenings spent reading on her bed, and the warmth of her grandmother's embrace. My heart sank deeper with each story she shared, a gentle reminder that sometimes love can be tangled within the tiniest details of our lives. I apologized repeatedly, feeling utterly foolish for treating her cherished memory so carelessly. We stayed up late that night, navigating through laughter and tears, acknowledging the fragility of our emotions. I never imagined that a pillow could spark such vulnerability, forcing us to confront things we often take for granted. After we reached an understanding, we decided together to continue looking for that pillow, even if it meant rummaging through the heap of nostalgia and dust lurking in that storied room. The tension eased slowly, like steam from a boiling kettle, and I found peace in the act of searching for it together. It was a journey that brought us closer, reaffirming our commitment despite the initial bump in the road. Eventually, we unearthed the pillow, still rich with its lavender scent and the remnants of a once frayed. We laughed as I improvised a half-hearted excuse about its coziness and discarded it into another box, recognizing its significance but opting for a new beginning instead. In the weeks that followed, I realized that sometimes, it's the little things that matter most and remind us we're a part of something larger. Our relationships are built on layers of memories, some heavy and some light, but all woven together in unexpected ways. And even now, whenever that scent wafts through the room, it's a reminder not just of a pillow or a memory, but how heartfelt confrontation and vulnerability can mend things we didn't even realize were breaking. Update: a few months later, I stumbled upon a similar lavender pillow during a visit to a local store, and it stirred something unexpected inside me. With a gentle hesitation, I decided to buy it and, upon presenting it to Lily with a hesitant smile, I felt the warmth return to our bedroom. She took one look at it and burst into laughter, realizing the full-circle nature of our pillow saga. The new lavender pillow graced our bed, not merely as an item of comfort but as a reminder of our journey, and now, whenever I catch a whiff of it in the air, I smile at how such a simple object can hold the weight of love and understanding. As the days progressed, the lavender pillow became more than just a comfort item. It seemed to weave itself into the fabric of our daily lives, an unspoken vow that we had made to each other to communicate openly and to embrace quirks, whether they be mine or Lily's. I found myself taking more time to appreciate the little moments we shared. Each evening, as we slid into bed, I noticed how the soft texture of the new pillow cradled our heads just right, its soothing scent enveloping us both in an atmosphere that fostered intimacy and warmth. One night, I turned to Lily, illuminated by the soft glow of our bedside lamp, and found her lost in thought, her fingers gently tracing the new pillow's edge. It seemed as if she was contemplating the journey we had just traversed. I asked her what was on her mind, and after a moment's pause, she admitted that she had been reflecting on how our pillow saga had inadvertently highlighted deeper truths about our relationship, how our unique little battles often revealed the ways we could grow together. She smiled then, that beautiful, sincere smile that lit up her eyes, and I felt a wave of fondness wash over me. We began to share stories from our past, laughing at the silly, stubborn moments we'd both experienced in our previous relationships, even during awkward shopping trips where preferences clashed like magnets with different polarities. Each anecdote drew us closer. I was reminded of how important it is to embrace and accept those differences, rather than let them fester into something that could harm the bond we nurtured. Days turned into weeks, and soon the pillow became a staple in our routine. It was a silent witness to our late-night conversations, whispered secrets, and gentle arguments over whose turn it was to choose a movie. We found harmony not only in our togetherness, but also in the acceptance of our divergences. The lavender aroma became a soothing constant in our home, an aromatic thread that knitted us closer every day. Yet, like all relationships navigating their intricate paths, we did stumble upon a moment of disquietude. One stormy evening, I returned home to find the light from our kitchen casting a warm glow through the window, a familiar sight that usually warmed my heart, yet on this particular night, something felt off. As I stepped inside, I noticed the electric tension in the air. Lily was seated at the kitchen table, her gaze fixed on the window, and I could see her shoulders slightly tense as I approached. Her silence spoke volumes. She seemed deep in thought, but frustration simmered just beneath the surface. I sat down across from her, the storm outside mirroring the brewing conflict between us. "What's wrong?" I asked gently, as I reached across to touch her hand. She pulled her fingers away, an act that stung unexpectedly, making my heart race with anxiety. "It's just. Sometimes, I feel like you still don't really get it, you know?" Her words hung heavily in the air. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, unsure of how to respond, but I pressed on. We spent hours unraveling our feelings, with the lavender pillow silently softening the edges of our tumultuous discussion. It was during that exchange that I realized how vital it was to keep the channels of communication open. My fear of conflict had often led me to be passive, while Lily's sensitivity to every little slight sometimes made her seem unyielding. Together we acknowledged the growing pains that had followed us from relationship to relationship. I wanted to assure her that I was committed to understanding her emotions, but my own insecurities struggled to surface amidst the haze of tension. We finally stood on a precipice. Either side could lead to deeper understanding or further resentment. After a long, watchful silence, I finally pulled the lavender pillow close to me and smiled weakly. "Maybe this pillow has more lessons for us than we thought," I said, chuckling softly, trying to diffuse the tension. Lily snorted in response, breaking the heaviness that had wrapped around us like a fog. As the laughter bubbled between us, we recognized the absurdity of letting such small misunderstandings amplify into something bigger. Our hearts lightened, and the glow in the room shifted. We promised to keep talking, to share our feelings no matter how uncomfortable they felt. With that, we drew together, the lavender pillow positioned as a bridge rather than a barrier. It was at that moment, nestled together in shared vulnerability, that the pillow gained yet another layer of meaning, not just a symbol of comfort, but a reminder of the importance of facing conflict together, wrapped up in love and understanding. There was something powerful in that concession. I couldn't help but feel grateful for the lessons still ahead of us, knowing that through it all, our lavender pillow would remain steadfast, soaking up the experiences of both laughter and tears, ever present on our journey together, guiding us toward deeper connection. As the days turned into weeks, the lavender pillow transformed from a mere item on our bed into an emblem of our evolving relationship. Each time I settled down at night beside Lily, I could feel the softness of that pillow cradling not just our heads, but our unspoken hopes and vulnerabilities. There were evenings when we discussed everything from work frustrations to dreams for the future, our heads resting upon it as if it were a shared confidant. It seemed like that pillow had the unique ability to diffuse tension, allowing us to speak openly, something we hadn't always done in the past. One particularly cool autumn night, when the leaves outside were swirling in the brisk wind, I decided to surprise her with a small picnic in our living room, laying out a blanket and preparing some of her favorite snacks. The casual atmosphere, punctuated with laughter, created a backdrop that felt almost magical. That evening, we talked more deeply than I had anticipated, delving into the very reasons behind our arguments, our dreams, and what we actually wanted for ourselves as individuals, and for our life together as a couple. It felt liberating, to be so open, and I found myself reflecting on the pillow's role as a catalyst for our newfound honesty. I shared my worries about our future, the concerns that gnawed at me daily, fears of stagnation, and unmet expectations, while she confessed her own feelings of inadequacy, the sometimes suffocating anxiety of living up to the ideal of being the perfect partner. We both laughed at our shared insecurities, realizing that the very things we thought made us incompatible were often the realities we both faced. As the sun dipped below the horizon, our conversation transitioned to lighter topics, such as that ridiculous pillow fight we'd had the week prior and her silly matriarchal instinct that had propelled her to guard her beloved cushions. I could see the glow of affection in her eyes as she recounted the moment she had chased me around the room, the carefree laughter reverberating off the walls, the moments I realized how resilient laughter can be in the face of even the toughest arguments. However, the deeper truth was that we were still learning, still navigating each other's intricate emotional landscapes with tender care. And it wasn't just about us. It became apparent that resolving our conflicts was essential for creating a safe space where our relationship could thrive. A few months later, As winter descended and we bundled up against the chilly winds, I felt a renewed sense of connection building between us. We'd found an equilibrium, largely thanks to that humble lavender pillow, which kept us reminded that love is not just about the easy moments. We often refer back to the day I had tossed the old one, laughing that it was the catalyst for change, a moment that pushed us to confront rather than sweep aside our frustrations. Eventually, the time came to celebrate our anniversary, and I wanted it to be special, a reflection of the journey we had embarked upon together. Little did I know that this night would not only mark our love but also balm old wounds. Preparing an intimate dinner at home, I set the table with the dishes we had shared on our very first date, recreating that familiar sense of nostalgia. After dinner, I surprised her with small gifts that told our story, simple, meaningful tokens that played into our shared history, the book she'd recommended that had remained unread on my shelf, a photograph of us taken on a rainy day when we had huddled under a single umbrella, and of course, another lavender pillow, this one softer than the last. As she unwrapped her final gift, the laughter bubbled up, and in that moment, it was evident that we'd not only survived our challenges but had also learned how to love more authentically. Because it wasn't about the gifts, or the pillows, it was about the memories behind them, the discoveries we had made about who we were, and the promise of learning more together. As I looked into her sparkling eyes, I realized that every pillow, every struggle, every moment was infused with the essence of us, reminders that, just like the lavender, our love could flourish in all seasons, rooted in respect, empathy, and a pinch of humor. It was comforting. It was ours. And I felt utterly ready for whatever the future would bring, knowing that a pillow wouldn't just rest on our bed, but would always be there to soften our disagreements and cradle our dreams together. When I first moved into my college dorm, I was filled with a mix of excitement and fear. Living away from home meant newfound freedom coupled with a whole lot of responsibility, but nothing quite prepared me for becoming a reluctant pet owner. My roommate, Jamie, had a long-haired tabby cat named Oliver, a fluffy bundle of mischief that seemed to have an uncanny ability to detect when I was vulnerable, and despite my initial hesitation toward sharing my space with an animal, I found that I could tolerate Oliver's antics, until that fateful Tuesday afternoon. It had been a long day filled with back-to-back classes and a looming assignment I was struggling to tackle. I returned to our dorm, a small space cluttered with books, clothes, and the ever-present scent of takeout. The moment I settled into my bed, ready to drown out the world with some music, I heard Jamie's voice carry through the thin walls as she chatted with friends. I could hear laughter and the clinking of glasses, a stark contrast to the chaotic storm of thoughts whirling in my mind about deadlines and future plans. It wasn't long before Oliver, as if sensing my solitude, poked his head through the door, his wide yellow eyes fixed on me. "Not now, Oliver," I murmured, hoping to ward him off with my exhaustion, but, as it turns out, nothing could deter his determination. He wiggled through the slightly ajar door and hopped onto my bed, his presence filling me with a mixture of annoyance and reluctant affection. I gently shoved him off, trying to reclaim the boundaries I had set around my personal space, but I couldn't help but chuckle as he stared up at me, his ears twitching with every sound in the room. Then came the moment that seized my attention and left me questioning my sanity. Oliver, in a burst of unexpected empathy, nuzzled his face against my hand, then proceeded to bat at my fingers as if to say, "I'm really sorry for intruding, see how cute I am?" I blinked in disbelief, half wondering if I had gone mad or if this was just a cleverly plotted scheme orchestrated by my roommate. "You really think a cat can apologize?" I thought, lowering my hand hesitantly. The warmth of his fur was oddly comforting. Yet that comforting feeling quickly twisted into discomfort as Jamie burst into my room, beaming with pride for her well-behaved cat. "Do you see him apologizing?" she joked, and I couldn't help but feel a tight knot of frustration building in my chest. I had set boundaries for a reason. I needed that space to unwind, to think, and to not feel like I was babysitting a creature who had no concept of personal space. "Maybe he's learned how to be more considerate," Jamie added, but the playful tone felt dismissive of my true predicament. The following day became a cycle of Oliver seeking me out, sitting on my desk as I tried to study, performing antics to win my affection, and despite my best efforts to keep him at bay, I found myself secretly charmed. However, a tipping point came when, the next day, he curled into my lap while I was engrossed in reading. I felt warmth radiating from him, and suddenly, it felt like Oliver had transformed into an emotional semaphore, signaling that I wasn't alone despite all the chaos around me. Just as soon as the joy of that connection blossomed, the reality of our living situation crashed into it. I realized that I wasn't just fighting against a cat, I was fighting against the inklings of companionship that came with it, the roots of connection that dug deep into my reserved heart that I had not anticipated. So when Oliver came to me yet again, his head bowing slightly as he gazed with those imploring eyes as if he understood my troubles, I took a breath and softly said, "You can come in, but only this once." In that moment, there was an undeniable shift, not just between me and Oliver, but within myself as well. It felt strangely cathartic to open my door, both literally and metaphorically, allowing this little creature to occupy not just my space but also my weary heart. As days turned into weeks, I found more peace in cohabiting with Jamie and Oliver than I could have ever imagined. I started sharing moments with Oliver where his purring soothed my anxieties, moments where Jamie and I would laugh as Oliver got himself tangled in random objects in the room, and before I knew it, our space felt less like a cold dormitory and more like home. My fears of losing control over my personal space diminished, and I learned to embrace the chaos that comes with companionship. In the end, I couldn't tell if I was the asshole for trying to maintain my boundaries or if I had simply been afraid of letting someone, or something, new into my life. Perhaps some apologies, whether from a person or a cat, don't need to be spoken at all. Update: a couple of months later, Jamie and I decided to adopt a second cat. In a way, it felt as if Oliver had guided me to accept that sometimes, it's okay to let in what makes us feel alive, especially when it comes in the form of warmth, purrs, and unexpected companionship. Reflecting back on that pivotal moment with Oliver still evokes a swirl of emotions within me. I sat on my bed, surrounded by familiar comforts, the soft glow of fairy lights illuminating the corners of my room, the gentle scent of lavender wafting through the air. Everything felt just as it had for weeks, a safe, predictable cocoon. After the strange encounter with Oliver, I had decided to uphold my boundaries, uncertain yet relieved at my resolve. But as the chill of fall drifted into winter, my heart began to soften, and I noticed the joyous familiarity of my life gradually morphing into something deeper. Jamie often shared stories, enthusiastic and filled with laughter, about Oliver's antics, how he would curiously poke around the fridge or chase after the sunlight that streamed through our windows each morning. I could feel the warmth in her voice, the way Oliver brought light into our shared space, and yet, I found myself struggling with the thought of letting go of my well-guarded solitude. Days turned into weeks, and while I maintained my distance from the cat, I also began to observe him quietly from a distance. His emerald eyes held a wisdom that I could sense, almost as if he understood my hesitation but remained unbothered by it. There was something almost enchanting about how he'd stretch languidly by the warmth of the radiator, echoing the simple tranquility I craved yet feared. Slowly, I began to warm to his presence, not so much in a grand gesture, but through those small, almost negligent interactions, like when I would stand in the kitchen and catch him watching me as if waiting for an invitation into my life. It surprised me how quickly I started to miss him during those moments I chose to withdraw into my room, loathing how I had created such a divide between us with my own fears. I found myself half-consciously leaving my door ajar at night, just to catch the rhythm of his soft padding outside, an unspoken invitation for him to join me should he so choose. Finally, when Jamie suggested we adopt a second cat, a rush of emotions flared within me: fear, excitement, and a surprising sense of relief. I realized then that perhaps my self-imposed barriers had been choking me much more than any intrusion of Oliver ever could. As Jamie collected supplies and eagerly researched rescue shelters, I felt a gentle nudge toward acceptance, the idea of companionship igniting something long dormant within me. When we first met our new feline friend, a timid little bundle of gray with striking blue eyes, it felt surreal in a way that made my heart race. As Jamie gently coaxed the shy kitten forward, I felt Oliver rub against my leg, almost as if he already understood his role in this new chapter. They seemed to know what it was like to be on the fringes of solitude. Maybe, just maybe, they had both offered me a chance to be part of their world, urging me to step outside the walls I had so carefully crafted. With time and patience, the two cats became inseparable companions, and in a way, they mirrored my own journey, growth born from vulnerability. They would sprawl across my lap as I began to read or watch TV, the tiny burbles of purrs resonating with a newfound symphony of warmth. I found joy in their elegance and mischief, how they filled the spaces I had once deliberately kept empty. A few evenings later, as we settled on the couch together, I glanced at Oliver, who nestled close beside my new kitten, and it struck me clear, they offered me not just companionship but a sense of belonging, a reassurance that life was meant to be shared, even with those who might initially feel foreign. Moving forward, I learned to trust my instincts, realizing that letting in love and connection also meant unearthing parts of myself I had neglected. The warmth of their presence became my nightly solace, and as I drifted off, I understood that. Sometimes, the greatest apologies are those we find in the simple act of letting go, of making space for what makes us feel alive, a realization I will carry with me long into the night. As we settled into our new routine with the 2 cats, Oliver and our new addition, Luna, I found a sense of peace creeping into my life that I hadn't anticipated. Initially, I worried that introducing another feline into our already chaotic household might upset the delicate balance we had achieved. But Luna, with her soft black fur and mischievous eyes that sparkled with playful curiosity, helped to soothe those fears. She immediately took to Oliver, who, despite his regal demeanor, slipped into the role of doting big brother almost instinctively. Watching them wrestle and chase one another around our small apartment filled me with a joy I had almost forgotten existed. Each evening, as I snuggled under my favorite blanket, I reveled in the sound of their joyful antics, the gentle thrum of purring united in a symphony of comfort that lulled me into tranquility. Luna, with her dynamic energy, brought an unexpected vibrancy to my once quiet nights. It felt like she had unlocked something within me, something that craved interaction, warmth, and connection. I began to share my thoughts and dreams aloud, sometimes to myself while I sat on the couch, the cats curled up beside me, and I realized it wasn't just a one-sided conversation. Their feline presence felt like a mirror reflecting my own growth. I found myself questioning what other parts of my life I had unknowingly restricted with self-imposed barriers, so I began allowing friends over more often, fostering deeper relationships and inviting them into the sanctuary I had created. Jamie noticed the change, too. We laughed more, shared quiet meals where silence felt comfortable rather than suffocating. It was as if Oliver and Luna were not simply pets but ambassadors of companionship, urging me to embrace vulnerability. The change wasn't always easy. There were moments when the weight of the world would push against my chest, reminding me of past moments when I had tucked myself away. A few months in, I had what I thought was an innocuous conversation with Jamie about my feelings. I shared how I had been reflecting on why I had initially refused Oliver's well-meant apology, recounting how I now understood that love sometimes requires us to open our doors, be they metaphorical or literal, to those we fear might disturb our carefully crafted solitude. Jamie nodded thoughtfully, offering me a smile that was understanding yet tinged with sadness, and in that moment, I recognized the strength within vulnerability. It was okay to feel afraid, it was okay to be uncertain. I realize now that receiving love, whether it's from a person or a furry companion, meant stepping into the unknown, but it is also where the most profound connections could blossom. The days became less about confrontation and more about connection. About sharing our lives openly rather than behind walls built from past hurts. Then came the night that brought everything together, a night that served as a reminder of the journey I had taken since Oliver's heartfelt apology. It was a brisk winter evening, and I settled down to enjoy a quiet night with a cup of tea. The world outside was painted in white, the street lamps casting a warm glow against the snow, while inside, my 2 cats curled contentedly on my legs. I flipped open my journal, a ritual I had embraced as I gathered my thoughts, documenting the emotional clarity that had graced my life in recent months. Suddenly, Oliver leapt from my lap onto the desk, his little paws tapping against the pages until he settled beside me, staring up with those piercing green eyes as if he were reading my mind. It struck me that there was a profound sense of gratitude swelling within me, gratitude not just for Oliver and Luna but for the whole journey that had brought me to this moment. I leaned down, giving Oliver a gentle scratch behind the ears, and said aloud, "Thank you for teaching me how to love again." When Luna nudged her head against my hand, insisting on her share of affection, I felt an overwhelming sense of connection, a comforting reminder that sometimes the most precious breakthroughs come from the most unexpected places. In the blend of their fuzzy warmth and the tranquil ambience of the room, I embraced the idea that letting go of boundaries could be liberating, not just for myself but for the new family we were building together. As I closed my journal and let the stillness envelop me, I understood that life thrives in shared warmth, and perhaps, the most genuine apologies come wrapped in the soft fur of those who teach us the value of presence, love, and belonging.